I've been drinking and smoking too much, that shit damages. Give me a lot, I can do it myself, I can manage it. 2 Zans, I gotta live, you know how it is. You and me, we can take on the world, we can be savages. I called my dealer, said share the wire with all of us. I told him we've been so nice, don't turn on us. Ain't it funny how the time flies by so fast? If we do one of these lines, we go on. And if I look into your eyes, I'ma make you realize. Fuck, I meant to just rhyme to this. Hey, go. It's definitely going down. Find a pagan on the strip, spin 'em round. Big men talking shit till we pick 'em down. Big men talking till we lick 'em down. Fair enough, I'ma spin around. Put the big in your belly, then spin it round. You can ask Kimbo if I've been around. Free 'em out, I don't need to get the pictures out. I called my dealer, said share the wire with all of us. I told him we've been so nice, don't turn on us. Ain't it funny how the time flies by so fast? If we do one of these lines, we go on. And if I look into your eyes, I'ma make you realize. You know that we can be immortal. Immortal. You're loyal, yeah. I'm just praying that she loyal. She loyal, we coil, yeah. I don't talk too much, man. Have they got mine? Crying out finally, and a little mercy. I don't talk too much, man. Came out silent. Came out silent. Came out silent. Came out silent. Oh, it's a beautiful day. Oh, it's a beautiful day. Oh, it's a beautiful day. I don't talk too much, man. Have they got mine? Crying out finally, and a little mercy. I don't talk too much, man. Came out silent. Alright, intro song. I was so high, I did not recognize fire burning in your eyes, chaos that controlled my mind. No, wait. That's when it's supposed to start. Whoops. Okay, I should probably have rehearsed that. I was so high, I did not recognize the fire burning in your eyes, chaos that controlled my mind. We're doing it live. Whisper goodbye, she got on a plane, never to return again, but always in my heart. try my best to feed her appetite, keep her coming every night, hard to keep her satisfied. Oh, keep playing love like it was just a game, pretending to feel the same, and turn around and leave again. Oh, this love has taken its toll on me. She said goodbye too many times before. Her heart is breaking in front of me, and I have no choice, 'cause I won't say goodbye anymore. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I fix these broken things, repair your broken wings, and make sure everything's alright. My pressure on your hips, sinking my fingertips, every inch of you, because I know that's what you want me to do. This love has taken its toll on me. She said goodbye too many times before. Her heart is breaking in front of me, and I had no choice, 'cause I won't say goodbye anymore. This love has taken its toll on me. She said goodbye. Her heart is breaking in front of me. She said goodbye too many times before. It's toll on me. She said goodbye. And her heart is breaking in front of me, and I have no choice, 'cause I won't say goodbye anymore. Explain, but I wanna try. There's this image of you and I, and it goes dancing by in the morning, in the night time. All these secrets that I can't keep, in my heart there's that hotel suite, and you live there so long. It's kinda strange now you're gone. I'm not sure if I should show you what I found. Has it gone for good, or is it coming back around? Isn't it hard to make up your mind when you're losing and your fuse is fireside? All these places we to go, I suspect you already know, but that place on memory lane you like and looks the same, but something about it's changed. I'm not sure if I should show you what I found. Has it gone for good, or is it coming back around? Isn't it hard to make up your mind when you're losing and your fuse is fireside? And I thought I was yours forever. Maybe I was mistaken, but I just can't manage to make it through the day without thinking of you lately. Fire. Shoo up, shoo up. That's the only part that's missing from the karaoke version. Is the background singers going shoo up, shoo up. Speaking of which, hello and welcome everybody to the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am Nerdslayer, NS, Justin, whatever you prefer to call me. And I wanted to talk about the recent GunZ Death of a Game video. I've been doing kind of like reactionary podcast episodes where I talk about the episodes that I recently covered on the Death of a Game series. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the community effort that we've had lately, where we've actually been playing classic WoW together. That's the Wrath version of WoW on a private server named Warmain, specifically the Lordaeron server. And that's been pretty exciting, honestly. It's been anytime I'm not playing an MMO, it feels like I'm doing something wrong. It's so hard to like explain to people. So let me try. But it feels like, you know, these MMOs, and most of them really are like other worlds, and they function like other worlds. What it feels like when I'm not playing one is it feels like I'm not exploring another world. You know, as cheesy as that sounds, but it's like, it feels like I'm missing something, you know? Like, there's another world that I should be like exploring or like getting invested in a sense. And I think it's obviously like a form of habit in the sense of like, or force of habit rather, in the sense that I've been playing these games for like 22 years now, but and now I'm about to say 23 soon. But it feels good to be playing them because it feels like when you play an MMO, you always kind of know what you're supposed to be doing. You know, life can be pretty difficult, and sometimes you don't always know what you're supposed to be doing. And but when you're playing an MMO, like especially like a game like Wrath, it's pretty clear what you're supposed to be doing. You know, you're supposed to be leveling your character, you're supposed to be progressing as a team, working on your crafts, making sure everyone's covering everything that's being missed or not being covered by certain people. You get the idea. And so I think that like that's, for me, that's wow, it's so weird that whenever I restart my stream sometimes, for some reason it just does not pause my video. So anytime I click on the restream, it always shows me still gesticulating and talking. It's kind of weird. Yeah, well, to be fair, I've done a lot of practicing off of Alex Turner. So it's like, for example, I just sort of always feel sick without you, baby. Ain't got anything to lick without you, baby. Nothing seems to stick without you, baby. Ain't I falling in love? Yeah, so lots of practice of watching a lot of Alex Turner and practicing, watching his live performances and practicing. And I'm just kind of like a mimic as a person. For those that know me, they know this about me. Like, I'm actually not a very literal learner, despite my Death of a Game series. Like, the whole detective thing is, if anything, was kind of like the origin story for that, was besides my grandma and grandpa introducing me to Sherlock, black and white books, black and white movies, shows, books, and TV shows. When I say shows, I mean like the old like shows that they would release that were like one-time limited releases versus like TV show where you're like showing something network every week, which is like Murder, She Wrote. So I was exposed to that stuff at a very young age, but actually, despite being a ENTJ, if you like MBTI, and being a fairly like logically minded person, growing up largely with martial arts in my life, so that was very logical to me. I've never really been that much of a literal learner. So for those that aren't aware of what that means, there are two forms that people primarily learn from. They learn from literal means, which means they read something and then they recollect it or they remember it, or it kind of goes somewhere in their brain. Happy Friday, everyone, by the way. And hello, everybody. Thanks, Goblin Ping, for saying that. Damn it, I always derail myself. No, we were talking about the origin story with the detective stuff. So what the kind of what you would call as an experiential learner is the other type of learner. This is a type of learner who, typically speaking, can have, in very, frequent cases, like very intelligent perspectives or hyper specialized ability or even high IQ, right? Like, but they lack either the ability to sit still, or they lack the ability to focus, or a number of different issues that they can suffer from. So people that learn through experiential means can oftentimes be athletes, but they're not exclusively athletes, right? Like, it's a bit silly that people think that, they call it physical learning, but it's not the only way you're learning. Like, for example, when I watch people play, that's how I learn how to play too, right? Like, it's like, that's not a physical thing I'm watching them do. Like, they're just playing the game and that's coming through. Like, maybe if I watch their controller or their like mouse and keyboard or something, right? But like, not really. So for my perspective, like I really heavily leaned in consciously to being very logical, being very detective minded, if you will, because I knew my brain was not that way. And it never really has been. And so if you're wondering, well, then how did you learn? Well, I had to be an autodidact, essentially. I didn't have a choice. So I had to teach myself throughout school. I had to teach myself throughout pretty much everything in my life at this point. And that doesn't mean like somehow manifesting knowledge. No, it means going and finding people that have the knowledge and learning from them and learning which ways best suit me, right? Like, so for example, to give you a context in like algebra class, I could sit there and like be like, all right, I'm gonna focus, I'm gonna watch, and I'm gonna da-da-da-da. But then all of my psychological issues and my brain issues, unfortunately, I'm sitting there and I'm watching, and it's just like, I can't actually sit there and literally learn algebra. It doesn't work for me. Like, trust me, I tried many times. But if you sit me in there and we start talking about, I don't know, theory, or we start talking about, particular books or history, or even like higher level thinking in certain respects, you would see me thrive, right? Like, anytime I ever took any standardized test scores, I would score really high. So like, the teachers knew at a young age that like I was like different, So like, I didn't really know that until it sounds really weird, but no one ever told me. They just said that I was smart. Like, so I never knew that I was like weird or had like issues growing up. It's, as weird as that sounds, I'm also Hispanic, so we don't talk about that stuff, but like, yeah, so I didn't really know that like my brain didn't like to think in one specific way, or like I can be in martial arts class, for example, like jujitsu, and I can sit up there and I can watch the instructor do the full routine. And then whenever it comes time for my brain to remember it, when it's time for recollection, my brain does this. I got nothing, man. And it's funny because people will watch me train and watch me do martial arts, and they're like, dude, you're really good. Like, why are you like seeming like you're trying to be humble about it, or why are you trying to like shit on yourself? And it's like, it has nothing to do with it. It's like literally my brain doesn't work the normal way. So it's like, how I have to learn is I have to literally get my hands on you. So that's how I learn martial arts, is like I literally have to like touch you and feel the moves. And then when I watch it, I can then simulate the sequence in my head using my body and my kind of experiential brain, if you will. So anyway, that should probably explain to you a lot of why I play in the way that I play. Like, for people that are now playing with me in Wrath, I'm kind of like a slow and a very particular player. Like in the sense that like I don't level quickly. I'm not in a super rush to figure everything out. I kind of go at my own pace. But yeah, chat replay is kind of borked. I was noticing that, Varag. I'm glad you said that, because like I was checking one of the other ones, and like the chat, it didn't even have my full like messages or something in it. It was kind of confusing. Someone posting about hype, or I don't know, getting views or buying views or some shit. Like, would you think that I would actually like say yes to that, especially like in a live, like the podcast environment? And even then, it's like, do you know what that stuff does to your actual algorithms? I'll tell you guys, for aspiring YouTubers and Twitch streamers, do not buy that shit, okay? Like maybe advertise, get people to click on your stuff, and maybe even pay for that. But like, and I've never done that, but like I'm just saying you can, especially if you have the budget. But like, don't do that. Don't pay for fucking views. Don't pay for followers or subscribers. Like all that shit's fake. It's meant to like take advantage of people that don't know what this or how the system works. And I'm telling you as a YouTuber, it ruins your algorithm. And once your algorithm's ruined, it's so hard to unruin it. Like literally, it works that way. And I don't know all the scientific reasons or how or da-da-da, but I just know that like you don't really want to mess with Google algorithm. It pays my bills. MMOs feel like in real life work, but fun. Yeah, I mean, I could see like how people see it as work, like, and I do like that you make the distinction that work can be fun. I don't like that people are like, well, work, it's work, and it's like, well, work can be fun, right? Like, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's what I like about Wrath personally, Bogus. It's so hard for me to not like Wrath for that reason, essentially, because it's like you have this game that allows you to play it in essentially all facets of the game, right? Small scale PvP, small scale PvE, slightly larger scale than large scale stuff, and it did it obviously in a really nicely well packaged, box. And so, as much as people can hate Wrath and hate what WoW did, and I've been there, done that, banged that drum many times, trust me. It's hard not to play a game like Wrath again, even in 2023, and still be like, damn, I really see why this thing hit, man. And I've kind of always felt that way with most MMOs that had, large amounts of success. I can see the reasons for that, but still, it's not like I'm impervious to not having personal opinions of being like, I don't like this kind of game or whatever, right? What's up, Mitchell? I am indeed a nerd. Hey, Mark DeShame, I appreciate the $20 USD donation. Seriously. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Taking a look at some old MMOs that are unique but almost lost to time. A request for Shattered Galaxy on MMO RTS that still has servers up but not many players. I will definitely cover Shattered Galaxy because I love anything that's online RTS or MMO RTS or MMO, like, whatever kind of strategy game. I love those games. I cut my teeth on strategy games. I cut my teeth on StarCraft 1 and 2. Of course, I played 1 for 12 years, like no exaggeration. I played it for that long. The custom games, obviously, primarily. But then, of course, I've talked about this before, that Artifact was this classic browser game I used to play that was much like the game that the developer who made GunZ made previously, Ace Saga, which is essentially this kind of like online MMORTS where turns and games would take place over the course of days, weeks, and months. And I loved that style of game. It doesn't really exist at the moment, but I loved that style of game. It was awesome. GunZ being a niche product made me feel it would always fail even if it came from a good company. I mean, it's hard to like, so let's talk about niche. Like, I really like to talk about the concept of niche, especially in MMOs, because people feel like it's almost like an oxymoron. Like you could never have a niche game in an MMO industry because MMO means massive. So like it has to be massive amounts of players, right? Well, it's like, no, nobody's ever made that rule. In fact, even the earliest MMOs weren't trying to go for massive amounts of players. They didn't even know that was possible yet. That's just what our perception has taught us from seeing blockbusters in the industry blow things up, blow the ceilings off. We suddenly think that that's like normal. It's not normal. That's why nobody else has done it. It's why it's not sustainable. So to the point that GunZ was a niche product, it literally was a niche product, but I think it has to be spoke to that. Look at how popular the video is doing now, how popular the content for GunZ does on YouTube, and how long the game's been around as essentially, to your point, a niche Korean product. How is it still getting talked about? How is it still getting views? How is there still private servers? At some point, that niche word doesn't make that much sense in the context of overall popularity. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's like a niche, but it's niche in what it's trying to accomplish, which is okay. But it got a lot of players, more than a niche game would, at doing that. I never got there, Kaiba, unfortunately. Biggest brain ever, exactly. YouTube already has the add, like, and subscribe buttons to the video. Ah, okay. What do you, what do, what do, you, 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 what do, you Hey man, great job on the guns video. That was some good stuff. Yeah, I appreciate that. There was some slight mistakes I made. I want to talk about that now. For example, I talked about Masongsoft was issuing DMCA takedowns. It turns out it actually was a fake company that was a P server that was like pissed off about some drama that was masquerading as Masongsoft. So that was a little, I think it could have been a mixture of me misunderstanding my source misunderstanding the situation, or both. And in the end, you know, it obviously doesn't change like a fuck ton of the story, but the point is that Masongsoft was not the one issuing these DMCA takedowns after parking guns after acquiring it again. Like that wasn't the story. The story is that they acquired it, did a little bit of things, and then kind of just faded away with promises to bring Raider Z back, but that never happened. So slight change there. Brood War was amazing. I've talked about this story before, but my grandpa introduced me to StarCraft 1 and Warcraft 1 and 2. So, you know, rest in peace, Charles. I always have him to thank for that. Like, he introduced me to these RTS games and really, he taught me how to play chess too. So whether he did that stuff intentionally or not, I have no clue, but he intentionally made me good at strategy when I was young. So without him, I don't know where I would be as a person today. Even though he wasn't the best guardian or parent, he was more like a kid. But the cool part about him was that he was a kid, you know? He would play chess with me. He would go ride bikes with me, and he was an amazing bike rider, and also a mechanic. That's what he did for a living. So just an incredibly skilled individual who didn't really have to try that hard in life. And yeah, that was my grandpa. Rest in peace. He was a great guy, but also not the best guy. You know how people are sometimes. Yeah, sometimes I also just respond late too, so I wouldn't take it too personally. I'm just like a slow responder because I like to kind of just take my time and talk through things, you know? There's a game called the Final FPS from the Titanfall dev. Do you think that they can hit big or be irrelevant after a year? Are you saying that there's one in development? I could see them doing well. I mean, basically all of their shooters have. Like, whether they'll last for a long time, I can't answer that obviously yet. I play Final Fantasy XI still. My server has 10 to 30,000 people on it. There's enough people to do things. You don't need millions of players, just enough to function. Exactly, and I think it's hard for people to understand this because they've misunderstood the concept of MMO. So let's actually explain what MMO means in the context of a game. It's context specific. That's what it means. That's why the industry has such a hard time with nomenclature and people even knowing what the game industry is about, right? Like, let's talk about genres for a second. RTS genre versus TBS genre. Anybody else want to tell me the distinctions? Everyone can list them right now, immediately. Right? What about third-person shooter versus first-person shooter? And it's not just perspective of camera, right? There's a lot of other mechanics there, right? Cover shooters, destructible environments, things like that are a lot more common in third-person shooters. So we have these like things in other genres where it's so clear to say this is what this is, and this is why it is, and this is what we expect from it, and boom. And it's like the MMO industry isn't that. We have this weird nefarious that's been placed there basically by publishers, because players having that perspective doesn't help you, which is that thinking that it's like everything is so massive and must be millions of players is delusional. I'm sorry, because millions of players isn't what everybody is trying to reach for. Like, in an ideal world, would everyone like their game to be played by millions of players? Absolutely, right? But the point is that when you make a game, you take certain decisions that alienate a part of a fan base. And the reason why this is a foreign concept to most people in the MMO industry is because MMOs aren't really doing it. So the majority of the big popular ones are basically all copying off of each other. So they play like different flavors of each other, but the same kind of thing, you know? And I think that, you know, compare that to shooters, and it's like, we were having this discussion, Bogus and I in chat, about shooters, how like, you have clear expectations of what a shooter is supposed to be. And when shooters like vary off of that too much, they get shit on. And that's kind of sad, you know, like we want to see them be able to do more risky things. But in the same sense, it's actually kind of cool that they actually have this standard of what people expect from their games. And so then to fully explain what I mean by context specific, each world is the size of whatever the creators want the world size to be. It really is that simple. It's as simple as, what size do the developers want the world to be? And that's the problem that I had in my SWTOR video, is that so many people missed that point, is that the game isn't dead. It's still around. In fact, it even had multiple resurgencies. As a multiplayer game, it wasn't an MMO. By what, you know, what universe was what was it an MMO? They stopped even releasing MMO content. Like, they completely removed aspects of the game where you could even play with other players by basically making it completely doable by your companions. So it was like, that was like one of those things where it was like, how big do they want the world to be when they take out all of the open world stuff? Can somebody just answer the question literally? I'll do it for you. They don't want it to be very big because they're removing the biggest aspects of the game. So that was my whole point with SWTOR, is that they, throughout every update, every major update especially, they removed more and more MMO aspects of the game. That's not what you do to a world. You don't remove those aspects. You add them to the game. When you remove them from it, you're building something different now. You're not really building a world anymore. It's so constricted in what you've created and what you've shifted it to being. And for people saying, well, how can you say that with absolute, certainty? It's like, well, first off, I've played SWTOR longer than anybody you guys know. Feel free to fact check me on that. I played it. I even have screenshots of when I played the game for the first time. I even have screenshots with me with the developers playing it at PAX with them. I even went to the bar after, as I've told the story before, with them, right? Like, so I was deeply embedded. They named one of the servers after my guild. Like, needless to say, SWTOR was like my life, right? Like, it was like a huge deal to me. But here's one thing that I can say with certainty. It's not because of my experience, all the thousands of hours. I was the first level 40 ranked PvPer on the server. None of that stuff matters. You know why it matters? Because what's the favorite thing of every player who's played SWTOR? The single player storylines. Mic drop, okay? And that's what I'm saying, is it's just like, people can think that I'm trying to argue against you, but am I really arguing against you if you like the class stories and I'm arguing for more of them? No, I'm on your side. It's just that you see me as against you because you are latching on to this identity of these three, letter word, MMO or acronym, that doesn't even really have a meaning in this context that even is useful. Like, the MMO parts didn't make SWTOR better, it made it worse. Why did they keep why did they keep removing those aspects? Because they were basically agreeing with that concept by literal proof. Like, so that's why it's like, I've always felt confident about my premise and perspective on that game because of that. It's like, you can see it. You could see it happen as you were playing it too, that they realized that wait a minute, we kind of made a game that was way better played as a fucking single player game. So let's just try to lean more into that. Would you apply niche in terms of concept rather than population? Yes. I think niche population is like a really hard thing to quantify in many cases, because it's like, people love to say like, PvP MMOs, they're a niche population. Really? Is that really true? There's private servers right now of PvP focused games that have more players than your favorite games. Like, you can't actually say that when you actually look at statistics. Like, and here's the funniest thing about the whole story of PvP. I love how much it goes 180, where it's like, people will literally say that Final Fantasy early on, I was one of the first people in closed fucking alpha banging the drum saying, hey, don't make an excuse for a bad PvP game because you're making Final Fantasy 14, okay? They didn't listen to me at all. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, you know what's fucking hilarious? What's having the biggest resurgence right now? It's PvP. And to the point to where people even message me about it. They're like, oh, have you heard that the PvP is coming back? And I was like, you guys are so funny to me. I used to bang that drum endlessly and people made fun of me. They said, nerd, stop playing Final Fantasy 14 for the PvP, bro. It's like, oh, sorry, I'm just playing it for what it literally has in the fucking game. But it was like, people were like, no, it's not really for that, so stop wasting your time. And then suddenly now people were like, well, actually, it's not that bad, you know? It's not. It's like, okay, are you the cult of Final Fantasy 14, or is it now like the arguments aren't really consistent? And that's the problem. Is it apparently they are popular. PvP is popular, because why are people talking about it? Why is it a big deal that Final Fantasy 14 started getting PvP if it doesn't matter? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then you can point at the survival game genre, let alone, which the entire thing is based on full loop PvP. So it's just like these concepts where people will speak in essentially what's called, in America, common wisdom, if you will, right? Or, what's the other term? There's another one. There's common wisdom, and then there's, goes without saying, right? Like things like that. People will say, goes without saying. You know, you don't have to actually explain it. It's like, well, you do have to actually explain it. I just finished watching your SWTOR, Death of a Game. Niche and specific are two different things, and it's tough for folks, myself included, to make that distinction. I played Plain Inside, so I have to agree. You are the biggest SWTOR fan, lol. I mean, it's like, the thing about SWTOR is that I've went back and even played the storylines again multiple times. So, and it's just always been one of those fun game experiences for me where it's like, it's so clear for me to see why the game is good and yet see why it's shit at the same time. And I still just physically cringe when I think back to Erickson talking about KOTOR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In reality, we just wanted KOTOR 3, man. Like, you know, like, I'd love to do a debate with the most feverish, like, SWTOR fans. If any of them would even accept it, I don't think they would. But, like, who wants to debate me on whether or not, if this game had just solely focused on being multiplayer cooperative, like MMORPG style, versus ever going massive, it would have been 100% a better game. Anybody want to take up that position? Because I feel like there's literally no way I'm losing that argument. Like, literally, based on how the engine was made and what engine they chose, Hero Engine, and also based on the lack of further single-player story content. Seems like it's like literally a shoe-in argument for me. Which is like, then you realize, okay, then why do people hate nerd regarding SWTOR? It's because they didn't actually pay attention to that video. Sorry. I'd be curious to see how many of these people into PvP survival games came from games like Darkfall. A lot of them. So, I mean, in fact, I remember Jim Jones as a name in Darkfall. So if you're Jim Jones from Darkfall, I remember you. But needless to say, a lot of us aren't very like popular players. In a sense that like we don't play like the most popular games. We'll just try to stick with the games that have like these hardcore stories and hardcore little focuses and whatever else. And so you're gonna see a lot of transference from Darkfall players going to survival games for that reason. Now that being said, a lot of my friends also went and played WoW. And that's the thing, is like for some players, they don't need to have the hardcore part. They just want to have the progression. They just want to work together as a team. They just want to, in fact, one of the guilds I used to play with in Darkfall has a raid guild now in WoW. So it's just like, I think for some people, they might be like, you know what, like, this game isn't for me anymore, or the game's dead, or whatever else. What hardcore story mean? Sorry, did somebody else say hardcore story? I meant hardcore as in like hardcore players who basically are okay with playing either dead, close to dying games, or games with very like difficult mechanics. These kinds of players I've at least seen mostly have gone to survival games. Who Mike Jones? Who Mike Jones? Indeed. Common knowledge, yeah. Common knowledge, I think common wisdom is probably the nicer version of that, now that I think about it. But yeah, common knowledge. Like, this idea that you don't have to explain it. Well, the problem with MMOs is that nobody's explaining what they are. So it's like, everyone's like, well, it's an MMO, you know? Like, you know what that is? It's like, what do you know what that is? Because most people's definitions don't make sense to me. So like, can you tell me what kind of game it is? And again, that's not me flexing my MMO nerd knowledge or some shit. It's like, no, literally, if we're gonna have a better discussion and dialogue and discourse around this to create better games and expectations surrounding them, we have to know what we're talking about. Like in any field, in any industry, you have nomenclature, you have words that you use, you have terminology that you stick to that have like meaningful definitions. And it's why, as people who know me at this point know that like I actually try to hold MMO to a standard just like I try to hold MMORPG to a standard. to me, these terms mean something and should mean something because they make games better and the expectations of these games even better too. So yeah, that's how I feel about that. I just wanted to say I love your videos. Cheers from Latvia. I appreciate that. From all over the world. I appreciate the love from all over the world. It's actually like, it's always been funny and kind of crazy to me how like the most like in-depth conversations and interactions I've had with people who've watched my content over many years now, like it's actually been from the furthest reaches of the world that I end up having the most interactions with. So it's just like, what that does to me is like, it really does show me like the power of the internet, the power of course, YouTube and MMOs in general, and just how much they mean to people, and that I could bring people from all over the world together, even just for short periods of time, to either watch a video or watch a stream. It is still pretty crazy to me, even though it's been this long that I've been doing videos. Like, it's still always a crazy thing to me. What is your opinion on Andrew Tate? Be honest. The only thing I really know about the guy is that he's in like prison or jail or whatever the distinction is in Romania. I'm not really sure. Other than that, I think it's basically sad that most male role models in America are people that A, aren't even American, B, don't even appeal to American ideas or understand them really necessarily, like culturally. So they talk from like their very specific situation with their very specific life experiences. The other thing I don't like about him, as somebody who's done martial arts my whole life, he was not really ever that good at kickboxing, but he calls himself a world champ in pretty much the worst kickboxing league there was that nobody really takes seriously. So I have to give him shade for that too, because his skills just aren't really that good. I've watched him compete, including compete against guys that I know who've competed against guys he's competed against, and he was like stopped pretty easily. In fact, in some of those fights, he didn't even throw any shots back. So the only thing I kind of make fun of that for is like, his whole like persona has been this thing of like, I'm so tough, like I'm a kickboxer, I'm that. But as somebody who actually knows what that stuff is about and knows how to do that stuff, he's not really that good at it. In fact, he's incredibly stiff, and for how much time he spent his entire life doing it, he's way worse than I thought he was. In fact, I watched him like spar his like cousin one time, and even his cousin was able to hit him, and his cousin was a beginner. So it was just like, anyway, that whole thing is a bit weird to me. And then the whole like, this is a movement that's been co-opted a bunch of different times by a bunch of different idiots. It's just whatever's the angriest, loudest, like most alpha seeming idiot is the one that will lead the next movement of like, I really care about men because I know men have it hard in the world. And so they speak from this very easy to identify perspective, because men have issues in the world. They're not always necessarily talked about, especially in public contexts, especially with things like suicide, with things like mental health, right? So as somebody who actually is, mentally ill, who has, issues, who goes through all this stuff myself, like I know that is unfortunately a problem that many men suffer from. But the thing is that bossing up or whatever and telling those hoes what's what or whatever the fucking thing, I don't really understand it personally, is just cringe, man. Like hating women because they dumped you when you were like 10 years old you just got to grow up. You know what I mean? Like you can't blame the world for your problems. And that means also you can't blame one race. You can't blame one group of women or men or one gender or whatever the fuck. Like you just got to start taking accountability for what your environment has contributed to your problems, which is a lot. So that will give you a lot of leeway there. You don't have to beat yourself up too bad, and then start to evaluate yourself and how you personally feel about certain things. I think that's probably a lot more helpful than watching somebody like Andrew Tate. But people will say like, oh, but he says that you should do physical fitness and stuff. So do a lot of other really good public speakers that don't also push a bunch of like really outdated and just kind of like intellectually boring and lazy arguments. Like I knew about Andrew Tate before he ever was even a TikTok star, because I used to watch Destiny a lot, and Destiny had him on one time, and basically the guy just seemed like a walking meme. So the fact that he ended up inspiring this many men is not that surprising to me, because sadly the state of men in the world and America is a sad state. Like there is a lot of like feeling like they're not getting things like they want, feeling like you're living in an exceptional culture and you're not exceptional. That hurts you as a person. It makes you feel like you're doing something wrong. And so that's like, these are things that like men and women too, but we're talking about men in this context, will constantly suffer from. So they need somebody that in their eyes that can make them feel like, you know what, I can get through this. But I think that a lot of that stuff comes from the death of religion in America, and the subsequent, essentially, like, takeover from what I now describe as mainly like this weird kind of nationalistic Christian Talibanness, like, that happens in America. That's actually lacking in any religious, like, foundation. They don't actually go to church. They don't actually practice any of the things that the Bible talks about or espouses. They don't actually build the communities surrounding these things and that are open to everybody and helpful to everybody, so on and so forth. So, like, it really is just like, if you want to know what to do in life, there's no easy answer. But one thing's for sure is listening to one person with an incredibly specific perspective on it try to tell you what it is, probably not really gonna work, right? Like, I've never really needed, like, the voice in my head to be like, you can do it, man, like, you know, like, if you just really push hard. It's like, I had to push hard to survive. I'm from the ghetto. I was born in the murder capital of my city, which was voted the murder capital of the country. So it's like, I've already, my family's from the border. I've already grown up with a hard life. I don't want to make other people feel that by being harder, leaning more into the hardness, that your life's gonna be better. It's like, it could be. It kind of worked for me for a little bit, but I've also been deeply depressed. I've also been alone. I've also had a lot of issues. So it's like, working hard for the Sigma grind set past a point's kind of like, it's actually stupid. If you think about the smartest and most wealthy people in the world, they don't actually really work that hard. And I think it's like this weird concept that people have become obsessed with because they're obsessed with work hard culture, the Sigma grind set. The problem is that the Sigma grind set's for saps, basically. It's for dummies. It's for people that are getting exploited by other people. So that's not to say that, like, so nerds saying don't work hard, okay, great advice. It's like, well, no, your advice is whatever you need for your situation. I'm not giving you advice, but I'm just saying that it's like, that's my perspective on it, right? I mean, I definitely wouldn't give anybody career advice here, because look at what my career was. I went from being like, I'm gonna go to school and, like, work in fucking a consultant company, and then on the way there was like, you know what, I'm gonna do construction. And then next thing you know, I was doing cost estimation, and then I was doing project management with no degree. I just figured it out on my own. So my road was kind of weird, and I threw all of that away after I got a job at a Fortune 500 company, because I just wanted to make videos, because I love it. And that's because I was always thinking of when I would do that, right? So it was just a matter of like, this is the best time. But yeah, I don't preach that to other people, like, oh, just fucking quit your career and be broke for 2 years. You know what I mean? It's like, a red hand pointing up. Hey, how's it going, Y mode? I appreciate the, is that Australian dollars? I'm so bad at currency, so you guys can make fun of me. I don't care, but is AUD Australian dollars? Whatever it is, I appreciate whatever it is. I think so too, Mitchell, personally. I've been protesting open world since 2012 in favor of co-op instances and haven't played MMOs because of it since, actually. I think they're two distinctive types of games, and I love them both. Which is why it's always weird when people try to, like, place me in a faction and be like, because that's another thing, there's so much, you know, this, like, tribalism that goes on in the internet, especially where it's way easier to be tribalistic, where people will say like, oh, well then you talk about like Final Fantasy 14 being more like an MMORPG, so that means that you hate Final Fantasy 14 and like you don't see the success. It's like, literally, no, none of that has anything to do with my arguments. Those are all like your emotional arguments, because I don't just like worship the game, or I don't call it whatever the Westerners call it, because the Easterners aren't calling it what you guys are calling it. Like, anyway. After all this time, did your feeling for New World change, or is it the same as your video? Actually it did change, but maybe not in the way that you think. I think that I was actually too nice on Amazon. I think New World is one of the biggest blunders of the entire past 10 years, decade. I mean, we haven't seen a AAA MMO since New World since 2014, right? Like a unique one, a new IP, an actual new game being created by a AAA company, not a port. We haven't seen it since 2014. So in 2021 or whatever they launched, 2022, whatever, I think it's 2021. And now they're at the state that they're at. I think that I actually was way too nice. I think I should have been way more critical, and that they actually made an even worse game with all that in consideration. So And by the way, that also comes from my contacts that worked at Amazon Game Studios. Another thing that it's not that just I alpha tested. I didn't just go to their offices. I know people that work there too. What are my thoughts about Eve? I mean, nothing's changed. Amazing game, amazing concept, amazing story. They essentially built their audience from essentially nothing, which is why this whole concept of niche is literally delusional sometimes by fans, because it's like, look at how Eve started. They started with like 10,000 players. Like, then they got 20, then they got 100K, then they got into the millions. It took them a long time, but they did it by literally working through it. Right? I appreciate that, Simper. And I'm not infallible. I've been wrong plenty of times, but I think that that's a bit of the difference, is that I'm okay with being wrong as long as I can be told how and why, and then update my perspective on it, because that's just called being educated and being, progressive, if you will. Is there a way to disable the profanity filter? I don't know, actually. I'm from Australia. Your channel is the #1 channel. I appreciate that. I actually noticed that I do have a lot of viewers from Australia, so shout out to Australia. And I've never been, but I would love to go. The joke from us Texans is that Australia is the country version of our state, because there's a lot of weird similarities. I've met a few Australians, including in Texas, and they've agreed with me. Like, our love for barbecue is like weirdly compatible. We love like animals and just doing crazy shit out in the wilderness. Like, we also have like really angry animals that try to kill us. Like, not nearly as much as Australia, but you get the idea. I blame the monkeys. In today's polarized society, the bandwagon mentality, you don't have to be right, you just have to be loud enough. Yes, exactly. You'll gather an ape gang around yourself quite easily. Exactly. And it's I'll even go a step further, that like, if I had leaned more into the hate part of my channel, I could have very much leaned into that aspect itself, right? But I think that it was something like really early on that it was like, my videos were done as like more dissertations. Like, they were never meant to be hating on something. So that was always something that I like actively would work against, is making my videos about hate or making people think that they're about hate. But hate fucking sells. So it's like, I could, like, speaking of that EVE Online video, I made a video about why I didn't like the game, and it's like, people still found a way to be offended by it. It's like, that's so strange to me, because it's like, in the game or in the video, I talk about how great it is. I just then ultimately make an argument that no EVE fan has ever been able to argue with me against, which is that I don't like point click, watch my ship fly around with one person piloting a giant death ship as a concept, versus cruise ships or versus actual space combat. Even if it's with larger vessel, I don't want to hear this shit about, oh, but they're larger vessel. There's still ways to do larger vessel combat that's more exciting than that. Like, no one ever has an argument for me about that. So it's like, cool, love EVE Online, I love it too, but I'm not gonna play it. It's fucking boring to me. What's your opinion on the Dragon Ball one? I don't really know about the Dragon Ball MMO, to be honest. I know that like the subsequent Dragon Ball Z games have been becoming more multiplayer focused, which is pretty interesting to me, actually. Growing up, it was never that way, so that's pretty awesome. And speaking of which, Ryan, you made me think of Tenkaichi Budokai 3, right? Or 4. Is it 4? It's 4, right? Yeah, 4. Oh my god, that's gonna be so amazing. Dude was literally teaching how to pimp. Oh, talking about Andrew Tate. I think it's because we haven't learned to get off this planet and we're bored. Not gonna lie, Power Ranger props have the best you laugh at that? Like, I know some people laugh at that shit, but I actually heard a martial artist who turned fighter now literally give that reason for why she became a fighter. She said she watched Power Rangers like do shit, and she thought, damn, I want to use martial arts and be a good guy. I watched Power Rangers and I had the same feeling. It's fucking weird. I want to make like a just fucking, I don't know, like a series about that, or just some kind of like study, like talk to some like anthropologist or something, but like study like which shows have actually had very positive influences that you would have not expected. I feel like Power Rangers, for people like me who are like martial arts and shit, we like, it was good for us, because it was like, okay, well, you don't just beat up, you know, good people, you beat up bad people. Like, you know, it was like, this is what you're supposed to do. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was the same, by the way. I get your point about how they're like the Taliban. Weren't the Taliban rural farmers that were actually religious, even if it was rather militant? Yes, exactly. That's how the Taliban started. Yeah, and I'm pretty well educated in a lot of the Iraq War and Afghanistan conflict stuff. Not really because I wanted to, but because just growing up, I read that stuff. And so whenever I say the whole thing about the Christian Taliban, I'm not kidding. Like, I have no issues against religious people. In fact, I am not only a spiritual person, I am religious. I'm Jewish. I believe in prayer. I believe in like huddling together and talking about your pain, and like, you know, like saying some words so you feel better about things. These are concepts that have existed for thousands of years that people believe that are way smarter than you or I. So it's not even about like intelligence. It's about this concept that there is a higher power. We know that. Whatever that higher power is to you, whether it's particles, atoms, another Big Bang in the weight, or the Big Bang itself, or God, or the earth, or the universe, whatever it is, in the end, it's something bigger than you. And I think that that's lacking severely in America, is they don't have a frame of reference for that. And I'm sorry, but I've been to a lot, and I'm from the South, so it's like I grew up in religious areas, and it's just like, how many of these churches and places that I was going to that are actually practicing what they're preaching? It's just an incredibly low amount, and especially lower when you look at like the billionaires, billionaires and multi-millionaires that are in the religious industries. Like one of the churches that I used to go to, because my friend used to go there and I wanted to go support him, had like, I think the highest income in like the entire area. So it's just like, what are y'all doing with all this wealth? Like where's the practicing where you preach? Where's the community? Where's the charity? I didn't see any of that stuff. So I've had a very negative perspective of religion in America, to be honest, especially because I grew up with Southern Baptist roots from my grandpa, who was very religious, and then my grandma, who was Catholic. So it's like, my grandma prayed every day, Hail Marys every day, prayers for me every day, call me at night, prayers before I go to sleep, prayer I'm gonna get home, prayer I'm gonna do it. Like, it's like, you can think, oh, but it didn't matter, it's just words. It's like, it kind of feels good, you know? And what it really means is that it's a person practicing what they preach, which is that she always did pray. She didn't just say thoughts and prayers and then just do nothing. She actually sat there for an hour or two. I watched her and would pray and would really care about it, and it would matter so much to her. So it's like, people expect me to be this, you know, devout atheist. Never have been. I've always been agnostic, because just like Carl Sagan says, I don't know enough to know. So I think being atheist is actually pretty arrogant. Just like being devout, any religion is pretty arrogant, because you don't really know. So anyway, I say that because I'm actually pretty friendly and open to the majority of religions, especially people that actually practice. I've met great Christians. I've met good Christians. I've met good Muslims. I've met good Jews, of course. Like, I've met good people in all types of religions. Good Hindus, good Buddhists. My best friend grew up going to Buddhist temples. Like, I've been exposed to these different religions. These are great people. You meet great people from all of these walks of life, all of these religions. And that's why I'll never be the person to say like, fuck this religion, or fuck that religion, or fuck this like group of people, whatever. It's like, sad truth is that religion, it's all kind of shitty. Like, there's a lot of shitty in it, but it's because it's been co-opted. It's because it's gone through thousands of years of morphification to create and have more power in modern contexts. So anyway, shout out to anybody out there who's religious or spiritual. I care about you guys and your beliefs, and if you're not, I care about that too. I would just implore you to start caring about something, because believing in nothing is not a belief. If anything, it's like closing your eyes and like walking around the world like this is kind of how I feel about people like that. So the Sigma grind set and the hustle culture. That's what it's called, hustle culture. Odd as dollary dues. Huh. I'm not sure. Oh, you mean maybe I'm reading comments from other places. Australians are British Texans. Yeah, I mean, it's like, if Texas is American Australia, what does that make Florida? Look, guys, I have friends in Florida. Shout out to Maghorn. I cannot fucking stand Florida. I lived there for a while, could not stand the politics. They're ruining their state. They have one of the worst education rates for how much money they make. It's just, there are so many categories that you can hate Florida for. No, guys, if you're an American, it's a real thing. We're not memeing about this. Just like Texas has a lot of stupidity and stupid things that I can't defend as a Texan. Florida is Florida, as Mr. Zero Sin says. Hate is the primary export of all social media. They're so rich because it works. It does, unfortunately. And, you know, it's like, I actually think that like, it's truly easy to take that path and know when that path is being presented to you, of when you can go down that route. You know, there was a content creator that I think even Des might remember, whose name was Downward Thrust. He might still make videos, but interesting story about this guy. So this guy kind of met me and started watching my videos before they were very big. And he was very complimentary and so on and so forth. And I noticed that him and a couple of the other content creators who did the same thing, I haven't really mentioned this publicly before, like they basically copied my series. I have, you know, the dates of when I created my series. I have conversations with them in which they were talking to me about my series. So it's like easy for me to go back and just show the receipts, especially for someone like Downward Thrust, who would never challenge me. But anyway, so then I talked to the guy. And it was so interesting because like he was an ex-business guy just like me, but here was the difference. He actually cared about business and making money, and that was his main focus. So when he would talk about like gaming and his YouTube channel to me, it was always business focused. It was weird to me. It was really weird, actually. It made me feel uncomfortable. I even told him to go gaming in private. Like, I don't know, this guy's kind of fishy to me. I don't like this guy. Guess what turns out, or what happens after that? Big scandal where it turns out he makes a review on a game he never played. So it's like, do you see like the issue there is like when you're so gung-ho about the business before you've actually put in your time and effort and you're, you know, you have anything to show for it, whether it be design, your, you know, news reporting, you're a journalist, your documentaries, whatever content you make. I'm not trying to say only certain content is good or reliable, but like he could have focused on that kind of stuff, but instead he focused on making money. So immediately he had people being like, okay, wait a minute, you're not congruent with what you're trying to present yourself as. And that's why if you look at my channel and how it grew so slow by comparison. It's because I didn't speed anything up. I kept it sustainable the entire way through. I never put out too many videos to where I felt like I was gonna die and didn't want to do it anymore. And I also made sure that every time I covered a video, I tried to cover it as in-depth as I could. Right? So whether that meant that I played the game already, went back and played it again, played it if it was still available, or the number one thing that I do, especially now that I cover so many games that I haven't played more recently, like, you know, games like Godfall, games like Babylon's Fall. I didn't want to play those games. I don't want to play those games. I'm sorry, I did not like those games. So what is very helpful, and now that I have an audience I can do, I actually get so much from my audience that they'll tell me, here's what my experience is with 500 hours in the game. Here's my experience, I beat the whole game, have all the achievements. Here's my experience, I developed the game. Here's my experience that I used to develop the game. Here's my experience, I know a guy that developed the game. Like, I get so many little bits like that, it's just like, fuck, man, it's like, I'm fortunate. But I feel like it's because I kept my nose to the grindstone and just kept going slowly, and I'm still kind of going slowly, I admit. But you know, putting out this GunZ video and then the next one coming out is Ragnarok Online. These are two of the most iconic online games and big games in my personal perspective and view of the online world. So it's like, it's exciting to cover them, but it's also still exciting to see so much excitement for these games. People were talking about, I can't wait to see RO, I can't wait to see GunZ. And then it came out and everyone was talking about how much they loved it. So it really was just great to experience all of that stuff. And thank you for the feedback on the GunZ video. Thank you for all the love. Seriously, like people were like probably the nicest I felt in a while. And maybe it was just because like my headspace, sometimes you read comments at a certain time, whatever, right? Like, thank you for the $10 USD, Corey Stiggin. Thank you for being a voice that advocates logic and reason. Yeah, you know, I think it's just that like, it's easy to hate things and it's also easy to try to like, you know, masquerade as you're the person who's always logical and always reasoned. But like the truth is that we're all humans. We're emotional, we make mistakes, you know, just like sometimes people have a bad day, you know? Like, in fact, I talk about that on my stream sometimes. Like, rather in my Discord, is like how parasocial relationships are something quite frustrating as a social person like me who loves MMOs and meeting new people and making friends. It sucks that sometimes like I don't get to really do that because like the conversations or interactions that I'll have with people are parasocially. So it's like essentially they think they know me or the idea of who I am, but they don't actually. And for somebody like me who has PTSD, aka trauma, I get very weirded out by people that try to act like they know me. Because in my head, I'm like, you don't know me. You don't even know if I'm a good person. You don't know what my values are. Like, it's very weird for me when people try to like me in that kind of context. And again, I'm not hating on anyone here who likes my content. You can like my content. You can think I'm fucking funny. You can think I'm helpful, whatever. I'm just saying that, like, for people who don't actually talk to me, have never talked to me, I've never even had conversations with them, out, you know, when I get messages where it's about like, oh, but Nerd wouldn't do this because he would do it like this, and it's like reading their perspective of what I would do is so wrong. Like one time I was on Reddit, and I haven't done that in a while, by the way, but I was looking up one of my threads that somebody posted, and somebody was like, yeah, you know, Nerd will like cover games that are like da da da, and he was like basically saying what my mythos was, like what my ethos was, what like my like inner character was about how I make videos, and it was just like, bro, I've said it before and you're wrong. Like you literally don't even, you're not even saying it correctly. So it's just like, that's the issue with being too parasocial, is like you actually will turn people off from even liking that person because you don't know them properly. Or you can make people like them who don't actually like them, right? Like there's many ways to look at that, but in the end, it's just more that like, I'm a human being. I'm a person who wants to be social, who wants to get to know people, who wants to meet people, but I don't want to be like talked to like somebody already does know me. You know, and that's something that I've still been working through. Opinion on Overwatch 2, honestly, forgettable. I forgot about it. Hank Green made a video talking about how Captain Planet actually made the work of ecologists harder, because it created a barrier between advocates and corporations they needed to negotiate with. Interesting. Anybody else have any examples like that? In my experience, the most people who are anti-religious are people who never experienced it. Yeah, in many cases, they really want to, too. That's the sad part, is like there's so many Americans that'll like talk about lack of community, lack of arcades, lack of places they can go as the third place and hang out. And it's like, well, like good religion should be that. Like it actually should fulfill that role to a certain extent. Not solely, but like it should, right? Guy was calling out pastors who have a nice car and big house, and then he drives off in a Bentley. Yeah, so I have experience with Korean Baptists, which is Christian, but I'm not trying to say if it's the same thing. I don't know all the technicalities, so nobody jump down my throat. But I mentioned this before, that like one of my coolest exposures to Christianity was actually through Koreans. And obviously, Simper might have different stories in mind, but for me, what was interesting about it was that like at church, we still did fitness. Like when I went to Korean church, we still did fitness. We still like stretched and got up and like and did demonstrations and stuff. And whenever my Master Cho, would invite us to come do demonstrations at his church, everyone was so respectful, so nice, so kind to us. Like we were kids who couldn't even speak Korean. We could just count to 20, you know, and say a couple of words. Like, and we, you know, my brother and I were white and pale looking as hell at the time, especially. So it was just like, it was this big contrast where these giant, you know, martial art kids basically. And my Master Cho, man, he was so proud of us. Like he loved us so much, he would take us to the church, and I could always tell he was so proud of it. And all of the Korean churchgoers and people there were so respectful towards us. So it's like this is the kind of stuff that dictates my perspective. If you're wondering why I have positive perspectives, I have plenty of negative stories to tell you about religion. Unfortunately, many that I probably won't tell because they're that bad. But that being said, I have stories like that where it was like these Korean Baptists, they didn't really have to be nice to me. They didn't have to smile at me or like tolerate me or really anything, right? Like, but it's like, but they did. And so that always stuck to me. that the area that I lived in Houston, and still my family lives there now, by the way, down the street, you can find Korean Baptist churches and Korean restaurants. It's Little Koreatown. But I feel so home when I go there now, even when I'm amongst Koreans. It's just like, because I've gotten so used to the culture there, of course, and the little bits of the culture I'm exposed to. But like the point being is like, and I love the respectfulness of it. And I know that there's a lot of saving face in Korean culture. Semper can talk about that. And there's also a lot of talking behind people's backs and certain things like that is not as common in other societies. But religion and martial arts, for me, have always been incredibly treated well by the Koreans. So it's like I have a lot of respect for Koreans, to the point where I'd even say that like I was raised Mexican American culturally. So you give me two flags there, Mexican American. You throw in the fact that my great grandpa was Scottish, and then my grandma had a Scottish name too, came from a farm territory that they went and got after coming from Scotland. So like I have this Scottish history too, right? I don't have a lot of the other histories that, unfortunately, I have a lot of histories of my background as people who know my mixture of races. It's like a boiling pot. But I never got exposed to Asian cultures. I'm not Asian in any way, right? Like there's no Asian blood in me. I'm 1% Senegalian, which is fucking weird and cool, but probably because of Portugal or Spain, most likely. But anyway, I don't have any of that. So it was all purely religion and martial arts that I got the exposure to the Korean culture. And yet it was still a positive experience, you know? Like, of course, I played MMOs, so I had that as well, but I didn't know what Korean MMOs were. I knew what karate and taekwondo was, you know what I mean? First. And then it was like I got exposed to that, and then it was like, you know, so on and so forth from there. But anyway, love Korean culture, and I can't wait. Actually, I'll even say now that I've been slowly still learning Korean because I live in Mexico. It's a bit harder to focus on one language over the other one that I'm still finishing learning. But I can say now on stream that my goal is next year. I haven't really decided where or when. Well, where, yes. Mostly where, but not when. Is I want to make a trip. Call it a pilgrimage to Korea. I want to meet Korean developers. I want to play Korean games that other people haven't played yet. I want to go to the arcades. I want to make vlog content that I want to make and put out kind of like on a secondary channel. You know, in the works, guys. It's going to be a while before then. But then also really just learn about the culture of them, how they play games there, so this is going to be like an expensive trip. Like it's not going to be 1 week. I can't get that in 1 week. I can't get that in 2 weeks. It might be a month. You know, it might be something like that, where it's like, I really want to go and do what I normally do when I go to a new country and just try to get involved in it as much as I can on the ground level, meet people, talk to them, tell me about your language, tell me about your history. And you might be saying like, besides just liking that stuff in general, I love that stuff in general. So besides just that, it's also because this is the mecca of MMOs. It's not even fucking close. The entire world bows in comparison by how many MMOs that Korea puts out and the legacy of their MMOs overall. I mean, it's just like, it's incredible to look at the history that they've put out and created and legacies that they've created. And so I really want to go get into that, figure out why they make games the way that they make them, why the market works the way it works. And obviously from the foreigner perspective, it's going to be hard for me to get this on my own. So I'm going to have to talk to contacts there, locals, the whole nine. So it's not going to be an easy thing, but I don't really like to do easy things. And that wouldn't be something that I would do for easiness, if you will. I mean, you can do Hail Science though. That's the thing, Maghorn, is that I'm the kind of person, so for those that are unaware of religion and high religious theory, I would recommend looking into Spinoza. I would recommend looking into Albert Einstein. These are two Jews in particular that I basically would probably say are the closest to what I view religious perspective on, which is that for those that are aware of Spinoza's God, God isn't everything, right? So think the force, right? So for the scientific perspective there, I mean, his perspective is actually scientifically, you can't really debate it. I mean, it's why he was such a fucking genius and people love to fap about his theories and his perspectives, is because, you know, it's very hard to just sit there and literally be like, you know what, Spinoza is logically incorrect or scientifically wrong. And that's because he was a fucking genius. So he knows that, right? Like he knows it's not as simple as just being like, okay, well, like I pray to this guy and his name's this, and you could be like, okay, well, who is that? Like, prove this, and you know, like none of that stuff would matter to Spinoza, because Spinoza would say, well, experience, including other body experience, can basically happen at any time, whenever, from almost any stimuli. So doesn't that mean that God isn't everything then, more versus like God isn't specific things? So that's about as deep as I'll go into my personal view on religion, but it's pretty Spinoza-y. I won't say it's one-to-one, but it's pretty Spinoza-y for me. Which, by the way, for those that are educated in Jewish Torah or Jewish religion, know that it puts me at odds with about probably 30 to 40, at least 30 to 40% of Jews. At least. Probably more, probably like 60. So, anyway, I'm Sephardic, so hey, you guys can take that up with whoever destroyed the first symbol. Yeah, I hope things work for you, man. Mag, that is. Did you move to Texas or a native? So I was born in a place called Sharpstown, Texas. Sharpstown, Houston, Texas. It's a small suburb within Houston. And, you know, I just, I don't like to name drop too much, but just go Google it. Just Google what comes up when you type in Sharpstown, Houston. I guarantee it's going to be something about murder or the murder rate. So needless to say, yeah, I was born there because my dad came from the border and wanted to get better opportunities. So he started working in Houston, and then he met my mom. And so at the time, he was still completely broke. I mean, he had just come from the border. He came with like $100 to his name. He had like no money. And so that, you know, that's the origin story of me. I was born in a poor, tiny apartment in a really bad neighborhood, but luckily got to avoid most of it. Yeah, luckily. We moved around a lot, which is partly how, but we did miss a lot of that. I appreciate that, John. RO was my childhood. Yeah, I just made the GunZ video, Lou Memory, so you gotta go check it out. Courage the Cowardly Dog gave me nightmares. Does that count? I actually think it gave me nightmares too, man. That show was genuinely scary. Yep, Korean Baptist NS right on the nose. And to your point, it was a big church. They would do like the ceremonies in the gym, like in the open, like, you know, gym. It kind of was like a basketball court basically. But no, it was huge. And even now today, the congregation has gotten even bigger. There's like rival Baptist churches next to it. Like that's how like, and even there used to be this mom and pop like market store. It's now literally Korean sushi. Like so it's funny like seeing all this stuff like where I grew up, like get changed from like American like regular kind of stores, like the generic stores, like not bad necessarily, but just like nothing like specific about them, to becoming these like very cultural like Mexican or Korean places. And it only continues to be that way because the area that I live in Houston, whenever I'm there, my family, I should say, is, like I said, it's basically Little Mexico and Pan Asia combined together. We've got a bunch of Vietnamese, we got a bunch of Koreans, and we got a bunch of Mexicans, and well, Filipinos too, but I'm not as familiar with them, nor do I know that many Filipinos personally, but it's an awesome area. The food is fucking incredible. Like when you grow up and you start traveling, you realize like what the food is like where you're from, and some people have rude awakenings. It was actually like, wow, the food's actually amazing where I'm from. Like we have Mexican food, like real Mexican food, and we have real Korean food, and it's awesome. How's it going, Lilium? You didn't expect Semper was raised Christian, but then you were raised as a Chinese American Christian. Yeah, I guess it makes sense. If you go to Korea, can you say hi to Faker? You should look into Pangyas at some time. What's that? You were labeled as a Buddhist at school. If possible, you should make contact with darker and darker devs. I would love to. I mean, I'll put it this way: if any like particular company would end up, you know, there's like obviously like influencer companies, but like if any actual influencer company, sponsor, or like developer was like, "Yo, nerd, you come and we'll hang out and you'll do this with us," I would, fuck yeah, let's do it. Espinosa's fate wasn't that good. Yeah, unfortunately. How do you how do you feel about pranking your bros? I mean, honestly, nothing wrong with it. There's no rules when it comes to pranking your bros. Like if you suck your bro off, fucking give him fellatio, make eye contact as he busts, ain't nothing wrong with that kind of prank. You know what I'm saying? Like, in us here in NYC, there's 10 churches on a single block, basically. Yeah, no, you're pretty lucky, and I'm pretty lucky here too. I'm not as educated in the exact area that I'm in, but I don't know if I mentioned to you yet that after I moved to Mexico, the place that I stay in, CDMX, is actually oh boy, we're going. Boys will be boys. You know what I mean? What is? Did I say something gay? No, but there is a, so obviously, you know, everyone knows Mexico is all about street food and food all over the place. And well, turns out that I think in the 80s or the 70s or something like that, it might have been closer to post World War II actually. Korea developed a relationship with Japan did too at the same time. What a fucking surprise, right? But no, but they both like developed a relationship with Mexico, sent a couple of like, you know, high ranking members there, created some organizations. There's like a samurai school in fucking Mexico. But needless to say, there's a lot of Koreans and Chinese people here. There's Japanese stuff, but I don't know, like, because I don't want to just be racist. I don't know if it's actually a lot of Japanese people. I haven't heard from Japanese people telling me there's a lot of Japanese people, but when I went to a previous gym before I chose the gym that I'm at now, I met 3 Koreans there, and they told me the lowdown, basically. They told me that you can go get kimchi off of a fucking food truck, basically, like a food stand, and it costs, you know, incredibly affordable. You can just get pounds of it. And when he told me that, I was just like, what the fuck? And sure enough, down the street, there's a place called, and this is the coolest part. I even think you're gonna think this is cool, Simper, even if you don't know the reasons why. The place is actually, so in Spanish, Korean is actually pronounced Koreana or Coreano. Now, why is that cool? Because it's not ka, it's ka, which, for those who know the history, is actually the original way you say Korea in Korean. It was with a C. And so it's so interesting to me, being like that nerd of history, anytime I see it spelled out with the C in Spanish, it kind of makes me happy, you know? I'm kind of like, that's pretty cool. We got to keep that, you know? Like, no, so it's with the C, Simper. So it'll be like Coreana with a C. So it's pretty cool, man. Like, you'll actually see Korea spelled the way it was kind of supposed to be spelled before they got invaded and then occupied by Japan, who then forcibly changed their name, which is really depressing. I think that's for most of the country. You mean like just being able to get stuff at a food stand or on the street? Probably. Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. But it's like it's a traditional kind of like Korean fried chicken place. And oh my god, dude, it's so good, man. They even do what's it called? What's the seafood pot called? Fuck, I have to look it up. Yeah, feel free to look that up though. Again, I've had Korean friends my whole life pretty much, and also been around the culture. So I know the story, unfortunately. In fact, one of the girls I used to play games with, her family lived through that. So like her grandma like would talk about that shit. Fucking depressing, man. When she would tell me about that stuff, it was just like, oh god. I felt so bad for them. As much as I love anime, you know, it's just like I've never really forgiven Japan for that stuff. I've always kind of been like, you know, Japan, yeah. So in Spanish they call it tokpaki, but I'm trying to think, what is it called? Topaki. Topaki. No, is it topaki? Let me look that up. Let me see.
Even English. So a lot of Singaporeans damn funny, so when you see it's like one T is t, right? So to. So put two T then stronger lor. Topoki. Eat topoki.
Topoki. Topoki. I got it. Yes. It took 2 or 3 tries, but it's topoki. Okay, nice. All right, I'm happy with that. I'll take the dub. I'll take the dub there. Yeah, those are pretty big here. In fact, you get it with seafood, which is like, so great. Oh boy, Gunstock. What did we hit on? I mean, basically just that it's an iconic game. The video was very positively received. I acknowledge the mistakes that I had made about saying Songsoft was the one issuing the DMCAs. They weren't. Yeah, Squid and Octopus, exactly. And I think there's maybe crab in there or like some kind of image. I don't know. I'm not really sure, but whatever it is, it's good. And it's a natural fit because like Korean food, as you know, is like oftentimes spicy. So it's like Mexicans making Korean food or vice versa. It works. It hits, you know, like that. And for some reason, Korean food channels are brutal. What do you mean? I think they're amazing. I think Korean food channels are probably the best. The presentation's really good, and they have a really healthy idea of how to make it fun. Though there is that one guy that I like. I think he's Chinese. Uncle Roger. Is it Uncle Roger? Is it Uncle Roger? I can't remember his fucking name, but I think he's Chinese, but anyway, he's fucking, you know what? No, dude, he might actually be. No, he's not Korean. There's no way he's Korean. That Uncle Roger guy, there's no way he's fucking Korean. That's exactly what I had when I went there, was Goju Chang. Goju Jang, or Jang. Sorry, I'm working on pronunciation. Oh, he's Malaysian. Oh, Malaysian. Yeah, he is. You're right. He is. For some reason, as soon as you say it, I could just hear his accent like summon into my brain. Yeah, there was a Death of a Game about guns. You gotta go check it out. I don't care for Squid. It feels like meat flavored rubber. I mean, it's like, even if I want to be edgy and like debate you about it, it's like, it's hard for me to really say it isn't, you know? It kind of is like rubbery fish, you know? Like imitation crab's like the same kind of thing. It's like, kind of is rubbery. You know, like that rubbery is not like a bad adjective to use, honestly. How much do I know about Warhammer 40k? Probably enough to piss everybody off. I don't really like 40k. I actually prefer the fantasy version. Sorry, everybody. I love when Uncle Roger just roasts people that just fuck with traditional dishes in general, because he's not even an asshole about it. Like, there's multiple times I've watched him do a video where he's like, this is actually very good, but for people not knowing this, I'll just look up Uncle Roger, because I'm gonna put you guys on, because if you don't know who Uncle Roger is, you guys need to keep up with Uncle Roger. This is like arguably, in my opinion, the funniest Asian
Uncle Roger
content
review
in the food biz at the moment.
The first time she used raw rice and cremated garlic. The second time she made fried rice with wet rice. Now she back a third time.
And today I'm going to be making
I love when he goes,
fried rice.
Oh, Uncle Roger never feels so scared before. This video sponsored by ExpressVPN. Niece and nephew, today Uncle Roger here terrible.
Sorry, Uncle Roger, we're not watching you.
Fried rice. I'm putting.
Hiya, first step vegetable. Uncle Roger don't like vegetable. Vegetable tastes like sad.
If you want to know what's in the veg, there's carrots.
We all know what that vegetable is.
And peas.
How much? What? How much vegetable you need? Who you making this fried rice for? A fucking goat?
Can you give them a mush round, but not with my metal spoon?
What? What she say? What she say?
Can you give them a mush round, but not with my metal spoon?
Okay,
What?
no, not
What
to
does she
use
mean?
metal spoon in non-stick pan.
Yeah, why would you use a metal spoon? You're just...
Yo, Uncle Roger actually quite impressed. This already put her above BBC food.
Oh wait, she's using it in a non-stick.
No.
Okay, I
You
get
know
it.
this is the first time
I
Uncle
see.
Roger impressed
I
my
get
kid.
it.
Maybe it's not gonna be so bad after all.
Here, I've got some onions here.
Onion. Okay. Usually Uncle Roger use shallot, but remember this cake cooking. We go easy on her.
Better word, it will be
So
some
I would argue that the reason why shallots is much better is because it provides a deeper
Garlic.
flavor of onion.
Garlic from
Like,
jar.
It's a deeper flavor like
garlic,
onion.
correct.
That's my
But just
personal
use
opinion.
fresh
Obviously, people are gonna say, yeah, but
garlic.
it's like
Don't use garlic
Asian
from jar. It has
flavors,
no
so you need to use Asian
flavor.
ingredient. Like,
Well, that went all.
I don't know Kay's cooking, so I'm pretty excited to finish this video.
So, stir it round again.
But by the way, whoever came into chat and made the joke about the prank, I'm pretty sure that was my best friend. By the way. So
Hiya,
if you're watching
Kay.
Kwa,
This is the longest story
you're done,
ever.
but I love
Just
you, buddy.
jump forward.
And I'll talk to you on
Do you know
Sunday.
about editing? Don't need to show us your whole cooking in real time.
Plus, isn't there Koreans named Kwa too, dude? Aren't you really Korean?
Probably about 10 minutes. Add some salty,
Salt good?
and some peppery.
Pepper good? For egg fried rice, usually we use white pepper.
And for people
I'm pretty
watching,
sure Kay
he's
just
actually
using
being
normal
serious.
black
Like,
pepper.
yes,
But
it's
again,
like played
this
up and
Kay
it's
cooking,
fun and it's
at
like,
least
but
pepper
he
is
actually
in
knows
the
what he's talking about. Like,
ballpark of
I've
the
seen
right
some of his videos. He's actually really good.
And then it does say to add some chicken.
Chicken good for chicken fried rice?
Hold on a minute, Kay. That chicken's already cooked. Yeah, I know. I know. I shouldn't have, but I did.
Yeah, already cooked. It actually correct, okay? Because your pan's so crowded already. If you put raw chicken in there, it's not gonna cook properly.
I kind of
So,
feel like that's
I think Kay
intuitive. Though. Wait, do people
accidentally
actually
do the
make
right
that
thing.
with raw chicken?
Cooked it and cooked
Okay,
it.
wait a minute. I gotta pause on that one. Do people actually eat that with raw fucking chicken? Like, why is that so surprising to me? I guess, did anyone here ever made that with raw chicken before? Because I'm pretty... You cook it separate. Yeah, okay. I mean, that seems like what everyone would do that isn't cooking it in the pot together. But I was like, do people actually make it raw? Like, what the that's so gross. Who would do that?
So, oops.
Oops, sorry.
Peas are jumping out of the
Oh,
pan,
crap.
sweet corn jumping out of the pan, everything's
No,
jumping out of the
I'm
pan.
ruining everything.
The pea jumping out the pan because the pea scared of you. They're trying to escape, Kay.
Says to add
Do, 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 do.
2.
Turn your phone off, Kay, before you make YouTube video.
Oh, I can never open it. 2 tablespoons
2 tablespoons of what?
soy sauce.
Oh, soy sauce correct? Soy sauce correct?
Let me pour in it. Come on,
Is she struggling with soy sauce?
I like how it like fast forwards to show how long it's been.
Okay.
I would never do it in one pan either. I think it's just the obsession people have with like cooking things in a
Come
lot.
on.
She really struggling. This is like the showdown of the century. K fighting with her soy sauce. Forget Logan Paul versus KSI. We now got K versus Kikoman. Soy sauce correct, but usually we put at the end after the rice go in. Otherwise your ingredient salty, but your rice too bland.
Just cook it, just give it a bit more time.
You know what? That
It does
also
say
makes
to put
intuitive
a
sense.
splash of
I like to put the
It
I like to put it on
you
after
referring
whenever
to?
I serve
Hey,
myself
she
the
keep
rice. So
referring to
I guess I
something. It
haven't.
say this, it say that.
It
I haven't
does
imagined
say-
putting
and
it in
does
during.
say- and then it says,
What you referring to? Prison food cookbook, is it?
I'm gonna get some
Oh wow,
water
yeah, that
and
makes
I'm
sense,
gonna
Air King.
Water.
Pouring the soy
No,
sauce
don't
around
put
to
water in your
deglaze.
fried rice.
Put a splash of water in.
What the?
No. What do you do? No.
This is a Jamie Oliver move. Remember niece and nephew? Jamie Oliver put water in his egg fried rice, and Kate do the same thing.
I don't. That's so gross
Jamie
that they
Oliver
put water in it.
when the
Think
rice
about
in
it. They're
there,
literally
rice
trying to
alternate
tell you
salt.
that they know
Kate
it's going to be
putting water in
dry,
before the rice, so
and
at
so they're
least the
trying to
water
like
have some
account for
time
the
to
fact that it's going to get.
evaporate, which means Kay actually doing better than Jamie Oliver.
Wait, so she's gonna steam the chicken?
So that gives it more time to build up. And
Dude, part of this stuff is like genius and also like insane. So
More longer.
longer in it. So yeah,
Where this woman from?
a bit more.
Longer.
Then it says now
she sounds Scottish to me, or like
to drop
From,
the
like-
rice in.
Rice.
from like Leeds, or from like I don't know, like Manchester. No, not Manchester. Definitely not Manchester. I take that back. What?
Okay. This rice actually look passable. Big improvement, K. Your rice actually
I think
edible. This
passable's
time,
nice.
I know it looked like it come from packet rice, but this is K we talking about. The rice looking like this big improvement from last two time, not bad.
And then it
That's the problem I
says
have
on
with
the
vegetables cooking them like that,
video,
Air King. Is like I hate eating smushy vegetables. I'd rather eat them like slightly cooked.
I wouldn't
Icky,
normally do it as a rolling, but
Icky, what are you, 5-year-old?
exactly as it is, and
Icky.
exactly to the video.
No, egg don't cook like this. You want to cook egg separately and then mix in with the rice. Otherwise, the egg and rice sticking together. It not good.
No.
Mix it all in before it all settles down.
Why does she
So
have
you'll
this
have
obsession with cooking things
to what,
with
eh?
the
Stir it
wetness
around.
of whatever it is to cook all
is
together?
your
I feel like
end
you're stewing
product.
at that point. You're not making
Here
rice.
is the taste test.
And let's do it.
Oh, this guy again? Who this guy? Is he her son or her hostage? Okay, where you find this Reddit moderator to
Yes,
taste
I was
test
thinking
your
north.
food?
Is it nice?
That is nice.
Is it? Can you taste the flavourings?
No, but everything else, like all the can you even taste the garlic that you put in?
Can you?
Can taste garlic. Good.
Even the soy sauce you put in as well.
No,
Yeah.
soy. Soy sauce, not soya.
Difference.
Yes, there's an A on the end. That you put an A on end.
God, fucking sue me, I've got dyslexia.
Last time you eat raw rice and then you eat wet rice, you don't have dyslexia. You have salmonella. Last time the fried rice so horrible. This one actually very good in comparison.
The taste is really, really nice.
See, his execution is just so good. That's what I love about him. It's like it's the quintessential content where he acts like he's stupid or like puts this alert that he's stupid, and then he just drops like a gem at the very end. Like, he's like, you don't have soy or whatever he says. You don't have a problem. You have salmonella. Oh shit. That looked pretty gross though, I'm gonna be honest. I'm not like the best rice chef myself or something, but like I don't want to eat that. I'll be especially after seeing her throw the egg in. Like the chicken was already kind of like but the egg, I checked out after that, man. Like yeah. You know, in fact, like the only time you do that with the egg, maybe this is, I don't know if other people eat that as much, but where I'm from, we eat it like religiously. From North Mexico and South Texas, flour tortillas and eggs and potatoes. So what you do is you can choose to cook the potatoes with skin or without. Without makes them much softer. With makes them have this kind of other like heartiness, like flavor to them. But basically you fluff the potatoes, and before they're done fluffing, like right before they're done fluffing, you throw the egg in there and cook it all together. And it works perfectly with the potato. It's a starch, like, you know, it cooks like very evenly. You know, that is the only time I've ever imagined mixing an egg in like that and cooking it personally. But you know, gross. I like how we spent the time watching that. That was definitely worth it. Here how we do it is chicken, then egg, then veggies, then rice and season. Gotcha. I think you're right. I think that is like a pilaf. I think that's a good way to describe it. I mean, even the rice pieces were pretty big. It's cool rice too, not raw. Gotcha. Speaking of which, I mentioned that we have a community who's playing WoW right now. We're playing on the Lordaeron server on Warmane, so if you guys would like to come experience classic WoW or you're just bored, come join us. Go to the discord.gg/nerdslayer and go to the Wrath section. Definitely cooking rice and chilling it. Yeah, no, like obviously, like it's easy to look at rice and just be like, oh well, it's so easy, but then it's like not actually that easy. Like if you're trying to make it with other things and do it right, it's easy to fuck rice up. But I'm more of like the person that I think it's funny when people can't even cook meat correctly. Like if you're a meat eater and you don't know how to cook meat, to me it's, you might be saying like I'm trying to gatekeep. It's nothing to do with that. It's more that like you're okay with like killing and slaughtering animals, but you just don't want to be the one to cook it. Like it's like it's a bit off to me, but I do feel like everyone should kind of at some point have to make their own meat, cook it, prepare it. You know, maybe not like from slaughter. I actually do feel that way pretty strongly, but I know most people are going to be very sensitive about that. So I would say that like most people should at least try cooking their own meats. Because that's the one that's like, I've gone to restaurants and people will say, okay, we've got medium cut, or we cook this like medium rare or some shit. And so you're sitting there and you're like looking at it and you're just like, this is definitely not medium rare. Like in fact, when I was in Spain, I found that it was either like if I wanted something cooked less, either I had to get it blue or they just would overcook it constantly. And it's like their meat quality there is great. It's not that. There's less fat content on their meat, so maybe it cooks faster. That could be an element of it. But yeah, it was something that I noticed when I was there. It was like I had to like barely cook the patties for very long because they would just burn up super quick. But I do think it's fun and interesting to talk about food, including culture. But more so, what's interesting to me is how people arrive at what they eat, what things they like to eat, and sort of like the habits around it. I think that stuff's also pretty interesting. You remember that Final Fantasy Battle Royale one? I feel like the video was lacking, I don't know why, not enough information or something. I mean, did you want more details about the game in there? Because that's pretty much most people's complaint, is they wish that I talked more about the game because they like the game, so they want me to talk more about it in that context. But it's like, I don't really know what else story needs to be told in the Final Fantasy video case, because it seems pretty clear cut what the issues were with that game, which is that the game wasn't really the issue. It's how they chose to go about it. How's it going, Awful? And Keiki, do you have a set schedule for streams? I mean, it's normally on Wednesdays at around 2 p.m. Eastern or 12 p.m. Eastern. The reason why I didn't do it this Wednesday is because I released the GunZ video. So the reason why I'm streaming today is because I just had some time that I didn't go to the gym today because they were closed. So I figured I'll stream instead since I didn't go to the gym. All right, well, things have slowed down. I think that's a good time to end the stream. I don't necessarily have a lot of energy today, to be honest. I'm pretty tired, but I'll be better whenever I pick up medication. But I am excited about the next video. Like I said, I'm trying to finish it this week, so it'll be released sometime next week. But there's a lot of interesting story within Ragnarok Online's already interesting story. So it'll be fun to just kind of like go about telling that as much as I want, because I was originally going to plan on doing Halo Infinite, but then they released season 3, so it means that I set away time and space to make sure that Ragnarok Online was like pretty significant, because it's 1, 2 that I'm going to cover, and then also the whole drama behind it. So I'm probably looking at like a 30-minute video. Opinion on Guild Wars 2? It's an awesome combat system. Pretty cool game. I don't have much else to say. If you're interested in foods from different cultures, try Zurich. Polish or, well, Western Slavic. Sour rice soup with eggs, sausage, and potatoes. It sounds kind of like goulash, or not goulash. It sounds like gumbo, which my grandma, the grandpa that I talked about, his mom, my great grandma. I grew up and I was very exposed to my great grandparents, so she cooked us food all the time, and she was obsessed with cooking Louisiana food because that's where she was from. So she would cook like gumbo and, you know, goulash and chicken dumplings and awesome stuff like that. Now, the sad thing is that despite being a quarter Ukrainian, it turns out I'm not Polish. I'm actually Ukrainian. I have no connection at all to that side of the family, nor food, nor language, nor like anything. So I don't know anything about the Polish/Ukrainian part of my blood. So I want to fix that for sure. In fact, obviously, whenever stuff in the Ukraine hopefully will stop and become safe, then I would of course love to go visit the Ukraine. But Poland is already on the list for sure, because Poland is actually technically where the villages that my family were from are, in Kulasaswe or Kulazwe, not sure how to pronounce it, but basically southeast Poland, and I mean where the Ukraine is where they were. And so it's a shame because I've always wanted to get more of like the Eastern European part of my family and kind of understand it more, but yeah, I don't know. I only just found out that I was Ukrainian. So yeah, needless to say. Warsaw? What about Warsaw? Warsaw is the capital. So are you saying like, would I like to go to the capital of Poland? I definitely would, but I also hear that like, that's like the most common place that everyone kind of expects you to go. I've also heard people tell me that I should go to Krakow. So the reason why I'm probably more interested in going to Krakow is if you look at the map here, Krakow, and I do this for all of my family, by the way. Well, I should say like the past only few generations, so like 2 or 3. Krakow is here, and these are the little villages that my family were from. Now, the biggest town that my family was from is now called Sanok, Poland, but it used to be in Austria-Hungary, which is why I thought I was Austrian, because everywhere on my birth certificates, my family would put, in their family history, they would put Austrian. But that's because they didn't really know what they were, and their family also fled. So there's a lot of that whenever you flee to America, you kind of lose a bit of your history and your story, you know, unfortunately. But I found out that there were people living in Sanok, which were the Jewish part of my Ukrainian/Eastern European family. And then these 2 small villages here, most interestingly, are actually from Ukrainian Greek Catholics. Really fucking random, but I found out that they're actually Catholics. For example, you'll find Greek Catholic churches in these places in Poland. So these are 100 to 200 person villages. And if you're wondering why my family fled from these small villages or how or whatever else, watch Fiddler on the Roof. No cap, I was talking about it on Twitter. But it's kind of funny because it's like the plot of Fiddler on the Roof is basically the plot of my dad's grandpa. My dad's grandpa brought his son over to Pennsylvania and helped him become a citizen, became a citizen. Then his son came down to the South, met my grandma, so on and so forth, on the border. So that's where I get the Mexican part for some reason mixed up with the European part. But it's always been funny and something in my life that's made me laugh, because it's like when I'm here in Mexico, for example, people don't really think I'm American. They think that I'm European. Oftentimes they think that I'm German. German is the most common thing that I'm called here. Canadian too, for some reason. I'm not sure why, but they'll call me German a lot. It's funny because in their eyes, it's just because like literally, well, I have curly hair, so like I can't really be just like normal. So like, what am I? They're like, well, they would have no clue that I'm Sephardic or Jewish. They're not really gonna guess that. Well, unless I'm wearing Star of David or some shit. But they're probably gonna assume that I'm like Germanic or something. And that's what I used to always get assumed as. And so my mom, growing up, thought I was German, you know, from my dad's side. But yeah, no German. They just spoke German, but they spoke German because they were on the border of, well, they were in Austria-Hungary, but now what is currently the border of, you know, essentially like 3-4 different countries that spoke different languages, but also had a lot of similarities in language. Like, for example, during their occupations, a lot of them spoke German. So yeah, anyway, that's where I would want to go, is actually Poland. If I would say like where in more Eastern Europe at the moment I'm more interested in going, I'd say Poland for sure. And I'm actually looking at a map right now. Let's see. I'd like to go to Poland. I would like to go to Germany, even though I don't have Germanic roots there personally. I do have shared ancestry, obviously, and my uncle lives there, so that would be cool. But that's not as like Eastern Europe, if you will. So I would say Poland is probably. Someone told me earlier they were from Latvia. Shout out Latvia. Poland, and then whenever Ukraine's safe, obviously Ukraine would be awesome to go check out. But of course, there's other places I would love to go visit here. I mean, scrolling down, I can pick like 5 different places, but I'm saying like if I would choose like the Eastern European routes to go explore, since I haven't done that yet, yeah, I'd probably go to Poland, honestly. It'd be pretty nuts to go check out the small ass villages that they're from, because it's just like, I mean, the way that the story was told from a shared family member was that basically the plot of Fiddler of the Roof, they talk about this too, but the Russians showed up and the Jews, the Catholics, even Polish people, most of them just fled. They literally left their villages, they left their cities almost like overnight, because it was just like they didn't know what to expect, and their history with Russia wasn't very good. So I don't really know anything more about them, because it's just like that's their history. They're in these tiny little villages, and then suddenly they just run and travel up to North Germany, take a boat to America, and here we are for some reason. So yes, I am a really weird mixture of things, but turns out, to add another weird wrinkle to it, I've always told people that I'm Austrian. Turns out, I'm not Austrian. I guess if you considered it Austrian for the time, then yes. But anyway. That is pretty random. The Warsaw thing did make me laugh, I'm not gonna lie. Internally, I should say. Can people outside of America, Canada, know the difference between Canada and America? Oh, you mean like phenotypically, like somebody just by looking at somebody? I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say no. Like, yeah, I'm gonna say no. I don't really think they can, honestly. If you have friends in Poland who would invite you, I would recommend going there for the holidays of Easter. Probably the best food you'll have in Poland is at the Easter table. Interesting. Awesome. Well, thanks for letting me know. And one thing's for sure is in where my family stays in Houston, it's such a weird, crazy bit of information. This was not on purpose, by the way, but I always tell this story because it's funny to me that like the most popular Polish store in all of the state is right down the street. And my dad never even knew that his family was from Poland, aka Ukrainians that were basically hiding outside of Ukraine. So he had no clue. So whenever I took the ancestry test and did the whole thing, like when he found out and I told him, he was kind of just like, oh yeah, like, you know what, like that kind of makes sense. Yeah, it was like this weird, just like agreement, you know. He just kind of was just like, yeah. But I would love to go to Poland for sure, and of course many other places. But I for people wondering, my personal family history matters to me. Matters more than, unfortunately, it seems like most Americans. Not because they just don't care, but because most of them just don't know. They don't know anything about their family histories. And sure, not everyone is going to be, you know, have fun, exciting family histories. Many of mine, just like many, I'm sure other people's we're just farmers. We're just regular people who are just farming for long periods of time. So, I think that a large part of it is that when people come to America, the only reason that you really keep your culture is through money, right? So unless you have a strong family unit and strong family like homestead who is able to keep their culture and maintain it while also being in a new country, most likely you're going to lose it and lose a lot of it. So I think that also happens to a lot of Americans, is they don't really know what their story is. And, you know, for some people, I can understand if they don't care, because in your eyes, you're like, well, I'm alive now, and like things that happened before me don't matter. It's like, well, they do. Like, even if you don't think they do, like without those things happening, you wouldn't have ever existed. So that is what I find interesting, is like, I have so much family history of my family fleeing from bad things. And it's always just been interesting to me, both why and what that creates as a person, you know? And what comes from that, you know? What was their life before they had to flee, you know, if you will? Because, you know, I have family from Spain that had to flee because they were Jewish. And then I had family in Mexico that had to flee because they were Jewish. And then I had family in essentially, you know, Austria-Hungary who were fleeing because they were Jewish and Catholic, apparently, because that was like a big thing people hated back then too. So needless to say, some people don't know their story because maybe they've been here for multiple generations. And sure, fair enough, you could learn about the story still, like if you wanted to see if you're like early settlers and whatever else, that would be cool. But I think for most of them, it's like if they don't have the cultural like tie and don't know that family before, there's no care for it. And I think that that's where I was lucky that I got to meet my great grandparents. So my great grandpa, as I mentioned before, on my dad's side, was Moreno. And his name, as it literally translates to in Spanish, is used to describe basically dark featured people. And Moreno is actually originally used to describe Jews. They were called Morenos. So whether or not he was directly Jewish, you can tell from just his name. Basically, he got discriminated against because his name literally is discrimination. That's an interesting thing about Hispanic culture most people don't know, is like some of the names are actually demeaning. Like if you look at the origin of them, it's not a good thing. Anyway, I got to meet him. I got to meet my great grandpa, who was Scottish American, who fought in World War II. I got to meet them, like, and did I have like the most in-depth conversations with them? No, I was young, and also they didn't want to talk about all of that bad stuff, to be honest. But like, naturally. But I still got to be exposed to them, see what they were capable of, learn about their histories and stories, and kind of see like what impacts it had on me. And like, when I talk about my great grandpa, his dad was the son of an immigrant. So the way it works is like, by that point, by the 100 years they were in America for that point, because they came in the early 1900s, and then of course I've been here since then. So like whenever you're there for about 100 years, you're gonna make some pretty good progress. So it's crazy that I can actually see that like the first plot of land that my Scottish ancestors had in Minnesota, that they then turned into multiple plots of land, and they have less land than they had previously, but they still have hundreds of acres. And that all came from the same group of people with the same culture, who all came from the same place, the Highlands of Scotland. So that's why like history and culture matters to me. It's because it's like, my great grandpa was a Highlander. That's what made him so unique and different than other people around him, is because he had this fortitude from somewhere else, basically growing up on a farm, living a way harsher life than most people were kind of exposed to, and volunteering for the war because he wanted to make a difference. So it was just like, a little bit different. Obviously that generation was pretty amazing, but like, point being is like, when you come from kind of nothing, you're a lot more willing to take these risks and do big crazy things because you want to make something of yourself. And that's kind of what my great grandpa's like big legacy in my eyes is that he was this farm boy who decided that he wanted to break against what it meant to be a farm boy and become something more. And so he went and became a radio man on a boat, joined the military, then became an engineer, then started building his own houses and his own things, and basically that's just what he liked to do. So he was always that person, and at the same time he was a man of not very many words. He didn't speak very much, but when he did, he spoke with a voice that was best described as like pure gravel, and this just like weird hardness to him. Not weird because like, I mean, I know why he was hard, like as a person, but like weird hardness in the sense that he was very nice and polite, but he just had this kind of like, I mean, first off, he was a giant fucking man. He was giant. He had giant hands. Like, I mean, he would hold hands with us, like, like you play that little chicken mouse, or is it, what do they call that game again? Chicken? Is it chicken, where you squeeze on each other as hard as you can until one person quits? I think it's called chicken, whatever it's called. And we would play that game with him 2-on-1, my brother and I. And I remember just being like, this guy's hands are just like insane. It was because he was an engineer who worked on, service vehicles, so on and so forth. And so it was like, his hands were so rough and tough. Needless to say, he also worked the grounds, worked on a farm. So like, yeah, like that, that Scottish history, it's like, is it deeply in my day-to-day life? It's like, not really, especially not anymore. But growing up, that was essentially who I looked up to was my great grandpa, because I thought that, man, he can do all these things. It's possible for me to do things, and for me to be educated and to love to read, because that family was they're very educated. I keep talking about the farm boy meme, but like my great grandpa was a farm boy, but his mom was Norwegian, and his mother or his grandma on his dad's side was Swedish. So they were incredibly well educated. Both of his female figures in his life, his mom and his grandma, had college degrees. So like, and that came from Sweden and Norway. Like, that wasn't because of America. They were farmers. Why would they have college educations? And so when my great grandpa met my great grandma, the whole idea was that he was the poor dumb farm boy, and she was like this like genius fucking like Norwegian Swedish girl who was just like, you're just a dumb farm boy. Let me teach you how the world works. And that's the whole origin story for my family. Basically, that's how it's told to me. Is like, he basically, she taught him how to be a person outside of being a farmer, and he took that hard work, combined it with her level of education, and they had great success as a family. So it's kind of cool to kind of see that stuff. But historically, again, the culture matters, because women in Sweden and Norway were actually getting college degrees. So it's like them being Swedish or Norwegian mattered, right? So it's not just like, well, the story is that they're American once they became American. It's like, well, they did become American after already being something else that led to the reason that they acted in the way that they did. See what I'm saying? You guys are talking about Genghis Khan. Yeah. I think I'm good on Genghis Khan conversations. Incredibly interesting guy, super qualified leader, and an incredible like story. But yeah, I mean, just like nothing that I'm gonna like jump in on or whatever. But it's funny that you mentioned Genghis Khan, because we were talking about the Mongols yesterday. I was supposed to play them last night. I didn't end up playing them, but yeah, so I can't wait to go visit more of my family around the world. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I met one of my ancestors, or related to me through ancestry, but not my ancestors if they're still fucking alive, but who is basically the cousin of my great grandpa's brother, or his cousin. So the original brothers that came over, I should say, that then had a cousin, and so on and so forth. So I met them, and it was nuts, because they were messaging me on Ancestry, and they told me that actually you still have family in Scotland that are still on the farmlands and grounds in which your family are from, who take care of the land there. So when they told me that, it was like this other thing of like, I'm so glad I kept following my Ancestry, because like I could have just listened to most Americans and just be like, who cares? Or be like, there's no actual tie, so why does it matter? But because I kept taking it serious, and I have like thousands of entries, and I love doing my Ancestry, I've found my ancestors. I've actually met them. Like, I met the people who went to Scotland and got to meet my family, and so on and so forth. So they actually told me that last time I had spoke to them, that I should go reach out to them whenever I go there. And it's, if you're wondering how, and like, is it easy everywhere you go? No, clearly not. Like, it's because my family's from the Highlands in a small fishing village. So meaning like, it's like fucking easy to track people, because there's not that many of them. And they were all Catholic, so basically you have religious people, you can follow them through the records, and you can also follow them where they're from. And so my family's just from some tiny little, in fact, I was telling you guys how I have this stuff saved, you'll see, as an example. So this is where my family's primarily from, in Scotland. And still today is there, but obviously doesn't have all the lands and stuff that they used to have. They're much smaller, more humble. In fact, the clan that I'm a part of is technically without a sept. So there is no clan leader, if you will. Partly because the clan that I'm part of is not the Southern McIvers, which are actually Campbells, basically, by association. but the northern MacIvers who were Gallicized. So essentially, when the Vikings showed up, they showed up in a few areas up here. Now, most famously, this entire swath right here was called literally, like the Viking. I don't remember the exact term, but it's like basically the Viking. It was an entire area owned by Vikings. And people will talk about how there are groups of people who come and go in terms of conquerors and invaders, and they never leave their culture and histories behind. For example, the Visigoths, which conquered Spain, most famously, left essentially no trace of them behind. And part of that's how long those cultures have been around, but part of it is also like, did people integrate with them? Did they remain their own culture? Did they keep their own language? Blah, 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 blah. So then if you're wondering, okay, well then how come the Highlanders have been considered so different? The basic story is that after the Vikings landed, they actually got along quite well, the peoples there. The stories originally were that the Vikings killed everybody and invaded everyone, and that's all they did, and Vikings were evil. In reality, the Vikings landed all over here, in the Hebrides and, you know, North Highlands, and actually just kind of fit right in. And part of it's because the people there were compatible with them. Part of it was where they were living was compatible with them. It was actually pretty similar to where they were from. In fact, it was better. It was, you know, less hazardous in many ways. In some ways, I should say, because obviously Highlands is one of the most hazardous places you can fucking go. Many armies have learned that the hard way, but anyway, so the whole story is that after this happens, which is the origin of the Viking Christian story, by the way, it happens right at that same time that they started writing the, what do they call them? Damn. Vikings have stories that they created that are about their escapades, that are basically like journals, you know, talking about what they did and what they encountered. You can read about that stuff, about the Highlands. And they had a name for it that I'm totally blanking on now. But that's why there's so much Viking blood in the Highlands, and so much Viking blood throughout these the Hebrides, these islands over here, or these mini little islands over here. In fact, they found places like places like Islay, for example, the Isle of Islay, has as much as like 80% Viking DNA, which means that it's like they were never mixed with other people as much as they were literally just Viking people living there. So there's multiple places like that in Scotland that you can go there and look at percentages of people, and it's literally like 80% Viking blood. But then if you go up to places like this, obviously where it's been a lot more, if you will, mixed in, there's a lot more passing of the cultures, you'll see less of it. You'll see less percentages of Viking blood and DNA in these areas. And of course, the further down you go, the less likely you'll see it in the major cities, because in these areas, they resisted Viking control. So they remained Celtic nations, whereas the problem with the Highlands and why it's always been pretty different than the rest of Scotland is that it wasn't really a Celtic nation anymore. They were actually speaking Gaelic. And now that is what, you know, Scotland is, it's pretty much the Scottish language, but originally Gaelic actually came from the Vikings who landed here and then taught their languages, of course, and all that other history stuff that happens with languages, until people spoke Gaelic. And now the problem is that the crown, including Great Britain, did not like Gaelic people. They hated them, in fact. In fact, one of the kings that was ruling at the time described them as essentially like worthless simpletons, like essentially kind of like calling them barbaric, if you will. And if you're wondering why, part of it is because of religion. There's like a giant war of religion going on. The other part is that they just spoke a different language, which meant that they had a completely different culture and origin story. And some Scottish people felt like, you guys don't belong here, fuck you guys, even though those people clearly had been living there by that point for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this happened, actually, it's pretty fucking depressing, but there's something called the Edicts of the Highlands, the Highland Edicts. Essentially, as the clan like hierarchy started to fail in Scotland. By the way, it started to fail because they were getting conquered by Great Britain, who forcibly turned them into a monarchy style approach, which was just much easier for them to then conquer and influence them greatly. So that was going on at the time. And essentially, they're encountering this big group of people who are very capable but not so educated. And they feel like, well, let's just take advantage of these guys. So the clan system in the 1400s, 1500s, and 1600s is pretty fucking horrible. It's what most people know as the clan system in Scotland, but it's actually basically indentured servitude. It's not good. There's no fucking like pride or some shit unless you're one of the ones that owns all the land, right? So you were turned into a substance farmer when you were Gaelic because you were discriminated against, and they took your land and gave your land to more British-minded people. This is all, again, all real. Feel free to fact check me as always. But it's literally my family's story, so I'm familiar with it. And so some families, like my family, who were Gaelic speakers and incredibly Gaelic-centric in terms of their culture, were like, well, we don't want to just like lose all of our fucking farms and belongings and be forced to go live in major cities, which is what the edicts were about. They were forcing all the people that were living on farmlands and little fishing villages in Scotland to go move to the big cities so they could go feed the workforce, basically. So it's like a couple of things happening all at the same time. Some Scottish lords took advantage of it, of course, like that's always the thing, but because the lord and laird system comes from Great Britain. So basically they were just taking advantage of the system that they were given and forced on, that they then forced on their own people. So like the idea of being like Clan Campbell, as people talk about in the fucking 1400s, wasn't a real thing, right? Clan Campbell meant that you were just a fucking slave. like you were just like somebody's farmer for like pennies, fractions of pennies on the dollar. And you didn't really keep any of your land. So subsistence farmers like my family, they had small farms that they could basically sustain, but they couldn't actually turn profits from them. So what they did is they sold a lot of that stuff and then went to America. And when my family, for example, showed up in Minnesota, it was just like steroids, basically. Because it was like America has all this arable, available land, and they're giving it out in droves to people who are capable. So my family was just like, sign us up, and went from having small acreage in Scotland to, you know, that didn't even constitute an actual farm to a literal farm ranch that still is in existence today. So Great Britain fucked up and it became America's victory, unfortunately, but well, for Scotland, but a lot of Highlanders during this time immigrated to America and other countries because essentially they were forced out of their own place. So it's not a very told story. In fact, that's why I got on my soapbox a bit to talk about it today, because it's like, unfortunately, like prejudice and things like that exist kind of everywhere, and Scotland was no different. I mean, they literally had people that were killing, abusing, not letting them actually like hold positions of power just because they were Gallicized people, meaning that they lived here and people showed up and basically told them, this is what you're going to do. It's not like they were like, oh, well, we're actually like, you know what, we're going to agree with you guys and now just become Gallicized. It's like, that's not how it works. So it's like, for those people, it's not their fault that other Vikings came and conquered and then they lived there fucking peacefully for hundreds of years. And then suddenly people are like, wait a minute, you guys are weird and different? Well, why are you here? Get out of here. And so, yeah, that's why Scotland lost a lot of its culture, sadly. It's because it lost a lot of its Highlanders. But the cool thing about that, and Maghorn can back me up on this, is that a bunch of other countries got a bunch of badass Highlanders and utilized them in World War I and II. So needless to say, what was the L of Scotland and Great Britain in a sense for the time, many other countries would benefit from massive amounts of Highlanders. Canada, America, even Mexico has. I think at the time they had a couple 100,000 Scottish people that went to Mexico. It's why if you ever see some red hair people in Mexico, there were Irish and Scottish people here. A lot of people don't know that, but sagas, yes, sagas, exactly. Sagas. No, it doesn't feel that far back when you count generations, Cuban. And what's weirder to me is that, like, when you can, somebody asked earlier, do you have any, like, nobility in your family lines? Like, yeah. And I think that, like, most people probably have some level of it. So I'm not trying to say, like, I'm so special. Really, the specialness for me comes from the fact that I'm a Sephardic Jew. So Sephardic Jews were led or put in positions of power of banking, being a lawyer, court rabbis, so on and so forth, of Portugal and Spain. So that's why I have a lot of royalty, is actually because of Portugal and Spain. A lot of my family that came from those places were royals, basically. But they were Sephardic Jews, which means as soon as the Inquisition happened, they got stripped and sent away. So there's no royalty left for them or whatever. They were sent to colonize, essentially. And that's what they went and did. Man, the sea people are super interesting, man. Don't get me started on that. I'll lose my voice. It's crazy to me, Cuban, because it's like people have this weird perspective where they feel like people back then are like dumb. But did you guys know that like people from like hundreds of years ago, even thousands of years ago, even hundreds of thousands of years ago, actually have no difference in IQ than you do? In fact, that if you think that they do, not only are you wrong, there's probably some biases you should start to evaluate about yourself. Because why do you just think that you're smarter than people that came before you? Because you have the internet? But like your brain, is it different? That's the question. Is your brain different than a person who was conquering, you know, wherever random place in fucking the Galapagos Islands or some shit back in like 1 BC? It's like, no. They have the same brain as you. They have the same body as you. Do they have access to more resources, more food, more information? Absolutely. But there's like this weird like arrogance that people will have about the ancient people where they're just like, well, they're stupid, and it's like they're dumb, and it's like, well, I've read a lot of people's perspectives, for example, on ancient perspectives, and what I found, which is probably what Nietzsche found a lot too, is like actually people are like really fucking dumb in modern contexts. Like I'll give you an example. I'll see a lot of discussion. Back when I was in high school, this discussion came up a lot too. But I've seen discussion online. People will say, how come the ancient Greeks really didn't just go to the top of Mount Olympus? It was an actual mountain, and just realize that the gods weren't up there. Man, when I read that, dude, and that was like on Quora, one of the places that they tried to get me to sign up as like a premium member because I would answer questions, which I don't do anymore. But it was like, dude, I remember seeing that. I was just like, you guys are telling me that you think that Greek mythology or terminated it at the extent of seeing the god? Like, how dumb are you? You think that they created this entire mythos based on the environment because they could see the gods? Like, what? What? That doesn't even make fucking sense. You completely don't understand mythology by saying that. It's like, when I would see people talk about that, I could tell what it comes from is it comes from this arrogance of like, well, they were just praying to sky gods and like, they're fucking crazy. It's like, the Greek religion was completely bounded in reality. It was based on the seasons. It was based on the water. It's based on the sky. It's based on the weather. It was actually incredibly logical. And in fact, many of those things are how they were able to come up with how the sun worked, how the moon worked, how rotations worked, how the sea worked, was through religion. Like, was through Greek mythology. So it's just always, it's funny hearing people talk about that in modern context, and it's just like, do you guys not, you don't even understand the religion that they understood thousands of years ago, and yet you're talking mockingly about it to them like they're supposed to be like stupid or some shit, you know? When chopsticks have been around for thousands of years, that's nuts to think about, man. Spoons too, right? Like, spoons have been around for thousands of years. We're still cavemen, but with smartphones. Yeah, no, exactly. Yes, and to that point too, to further explain, for people that aren't familiar with how Greek thought worked back then, Greek thought was religion. Like that's not separate. Like people like to say that it's separate, and it's like, oh, but like the Greek philosophers were who were they talking about? Greek mythology, right? Like they were still acknowledging that that was an incredible, important part of the entire discovery of rational thought, let alone like creating, you know, a better structure for a society. So meaning that like it was the thing that they were building it on. Religion was originally built on the rules of the world, right? I think that's where it became really problematic, is it hasn't really been that way since, for a long time. That's very believable. Also, the whole concept of barbarians is also just, it's one of those things that it kind of proves our point here, right? Like, you encounter a group of people you're not familiar with customs you're not familiar with. Naturally, you encounter them and you're like, okay, well, you guys are barbaric. When it's like, the barbarians sacked Rome 4 times. And, yeah. And they defeated Rome. They literally beat them. So it was like, the barbaric parts were useful in describing a Romanized people, but after they're Romanized, you continue to call them barbaric. It literally just means you're stupid because you don't understand how history or culture works, because those barbarians got Romanized and then they destroyed Rome. So it's just, again, it's like that example of like, you look at it, it's like, well, of course those are capable, very strong people. Suddenly give them Roman ideals and Roman logistics, and it's like, well, fucking of course they started to become these conquering tribes that were dominating everybody. They already knew how to live in harsh environments and basically would fight with no armor. So it's like suddenly you have armor and shit, and it's like, okay, well, damn, this is actually, sustainable. I'm not just gonna get cut every fight. Like, obviously oversimplification, but I do find that like that's one of the most interesting things about ancient history to me, is that people feel like they're dumb, Meanwhile, imagine being a pilot in the 40s or the 30s, right? It's like, imagine riding boats back during whenever they were trying to discover how to get across the ocean. It's like, you fucked up, you died. Yeah, so to think that those people weren't incredibly skilled, I mean, come on, man. I don't know what it is about that. That's like, maybe it's just this idea of like, well, their technology is more primitive, so then therefore that means that they're dumber. But it's like, but what if you gave them better technology? Would they then not adapt just like we did? Well, of course they would. Like the 1800s is the perfect example of that. The 1800s is the fastest gain in technology we've ever seen in history. And yet, look at how fast people got used to it. I'm not saying they fully have gotten used to it yet, or like, like the effects of all that, but like going from steam engines to suddenly actual like engines powered by pistons and and that you can put in your small vehicle, like imagine like how much of a shift that was. There's pictures, actually, I recommend you guys to look it up. There's pictures of America during the height of the 1800s and mid 1800s, and then like before after, and it's fucking shocking how different it looks. It looks so different. Like, not just like how everything looks, but I'm saying how it functions and what people were like doing in their day-to-day life. It's like, whoa, like this is so like everything changed in like 40 years, like, anyway. But then you can't see under the skirt. Yeah, and the other thing about ancient Greeks is they love the sight of muscly men and women. So you can't help but feel like that might have been a part of it too, right? Obviously, we know with the Spartans it was, because most famously, it was kind of like you wore your breastplate, your helmet, your side pieces, and that was it. Like that was the extent of your armor. Stick and stone is still a top tier weapon. It is, because it can kill somebody. Exactly, Maghorn. And what I think is even crazier about that is that some things we used to think were incredibly simple, it actually turns out are more complex than we ever thought. Everyone's going to talk about Roman cement, but that's an easy example. I got another one. What's crazy is that, did you guys know that the creation of early weaponry and shards of rocks and minerals, it's actually an entire process of creation? Like, when I was a kid, I used to just think that they just banged rocks together. Like, I know many people in chat right now are probably agreeing with me. You're probably like, yeah, that's what I thought too. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that's what I used to think. I used to think it was just like, okay, it was like, you take these two things and you just, boom, all right. And this one is like, yeah. And then you put it in here and then boom, there's a sword or a weapon. It's like, did you know that they actually discovered how to break them at the plane? Did you actually know that, like, when they break pieces off for tools, they were actually doing it with an entire process? Isn't that fucking crazy to think about? Look this shit up. Still today, in modern history, people have been just barely discovering how to do this. So, and this guy recently talked about it. He's a master weaponsmith. And he did a video about it where he was talking about it took him months to master this process. An archaic banging rocks together process. I really looked this shit up. It sounds so fucking simple. And yet when you actually hear what they do and how they do it, it makes a lot more sense. They know where to break things to get the best chunk of a piece. And that there's a science to it because these are minerals. These are literal pieces of science, right? So it's like, that's crazy to me that, like, we used to just think it was just like, oh, it's just banging rocks together and here's some tools. And it's like, no, even back then they had a process for that. How crazy is that? I don't fucking know how that shit works. I would have just been banging rocks together and been like, okay, here's my, and then it would have broke on the first fucking swing. Do you see why it matters? Because if you have something terminating at a plane, for example, but you're actually using it as your weapon, all you're doing basically is just smashing a breakable piece of mineral up against something, which could still hurt it, which could still do damage. It's not really like a deep level weapon or you see what I'm saying? So, like, yeah, seriously, caveman tech is insane. And in fact, I was ranting to Bacon Night the other night that, like, the funniest thing, and this is the last thing I'll talk about, that always cracks me up about the story of Spain coming to Latin America, is that it's told like it's like, damn, 300, conquistadors show up and they just beat like thousands of people, without mentioning the whole death due to disease, which was like 80% of the deaths. But let's just ignore that part and say it was like a straight fight. I've read the early accounts of conquistadors and the Aztecs, and a single conquistador with their steel weapons and armor was able to kill 30 Aztecs in just a mere minutes. So if you do the math, imagine what 300 of them could do. Well, you don't have to imagine. They did it through the use of not just fighting, but through the use of tactics and tricking people and so on and so forth. So when they encountered the Aztecs, people love to talk about, like, the Aztecs were a warrior race. They were. The problem is they were 2 fucking ages behind. Like, they hadn't even gotten to steel yet. They hadn't even fully gotten to copper yet. In fact, they had made copper tubing and created their aqueducts, but it was incredibly old base bronze copper stuff. People don't know that they were able to come up with aqueducts, sure, but with bronze technology. So, like, when the Spanish showed up, it was like when you're playing Civ and you run up against the guys who drop the fucking future soldiers, or what do they call them? Like the futuristic soldiers. And you're like, what the fuck? Like, how am I supposed to beat these guys? Or when someone drops like fucking like Minutemen and you're still with like archers, it's like, how can I beat these guys? History is full of stuff like that. And the Aztec story, as cool as it is and as warrior-like as their culture was about taking slaves, not winning wars. So when they encountered an actual country who was farly more advanced and actually knew how to win wars and conquer, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, they got beat pretty easily. Because they literally lacked weapons to even properly kill. So like, it's so funny, like the history books will always talk about like obsidian weapons, and for people here who know weaponry, you're probably laughing alongside with me, which is like obsidian I felt and seen and held in person. It is incredibly sharp. It is fucking scary sharp. But you know what it also is? It is insanely brittle. It is so weak. So that's what the Aztecs were using as their blades, if you will, because they didn't have a sword. But they were using it as like multiple versions of this were turned into different types of weapons. So even if you just think about the concept of dueling, people love to talk about sword fighting and dueling. Sure, what is an obsidian weapon going to do against a gun? But what is an obsidian weapon going to do against a sword? Just a steel Toledo sword. The best swords in pretty much the entire medieval world. If you're not familiar with why Toledo swords are so cool, it's basically because they can bend while still maintaining flexion and tension. So if you look at a Toledo blade, it does this. So essentially, conquistadors are fighting in giant pieces of armor that are incredibly well developed with guns, which weren't the big part of their weaponry, by the way, but they still had them. And steel swords made by the best swords craftsmen there ever was. So they are made by a wizard. I've seen them in person. These Toledo swords aren't just hype, guys. I've seen them in person. I've felt them. They are impressive, man. It's crazy that they were making swords like that back then, but it's because the Visigoths used Toledo as a place to make things, right? And then the Jews took over Toledo and then up that to the next level. So Toledo became like the medieval capital, but also was the medieval capital because it was exporting death. Knights and guns and, you know, all that weaponry stuff. But anyway, so it's interesting because you go to the museums here and you can literally just go look at the weaponry and see for yourself. Like I've been to the major museum here in Mexico City and seen the Aztec weaponry. It is impossible that the Aztecs would have been able to ever match up against the Spanish just in terms of weaponry alone. So that being said, you might be wondering if you're a Civ player, well, could they have aged up? Well, here's the thing. They were close. Actually, historically, they were very close. I'm not familiar with Speechy, but what's it about? Based historian hour. I've spent way too much time reading and researching this stuff, so it's cool that I can at least go and use this information or find it entertaining with someone else. But yeah, you can just go look at their weaponry. So I'm obsessed with conflict in general. For people that know me, they know that I love studying all kinds of conflict. I love also training different means of combat. For example, hand-to-hand, you know, using your legs, weapon-based combat, obviously firing guns, shooting guns, so on and so forth. Like, I'm a fan of all of it, but what I've always been most interested in is history, where you can see where basically military tactics, where military tactics and military weaponry completely changed the course of whatever happened. Like, shockingly. Like, I mentioned the conquistadors because, of course, that's a story I'm very familiar with. But that's just, you know, of course, one example. The Canary Islands, for example, had a number of indigenous tribes living there already. When the Spanish showed up, they had clubs. So, what do you think happened to them? In fact, if you want to look into history, island people have been historically fucked on the most. It sounds cool to live on an island, right? Like you're like, oh, this is awesome. I can live on an island. I'm safe. And then an advanced power that didn't live on an island shows up and you're like, what do I do? Nothing. You lose. That's what you do. So it's like so much of these stories you imagine, like indigenous people with like fucking swords and spears and shit, like just like fighting. It's like it wasn't that glorious. They just got destroyed a lot of the time by way more advanced people. You like conflict? What about the Chinese war with Jesus' brother? The whole warring state before the Three Kingdoms? I mean, I'm not gonna say that I'm educated in all like conflict, obviously, if that's what you're saying. But one thing I will say is that China is one of the most interesting places in combat history, and that's because not only do they have like essentially besides the Indian people, the oldest claim to martial arts. They have the oldest like structured claim to martial arts. They taught their military at large early on martial arts for effectiveness. So they're very interesting to me as a nation for many reasons like that. Now that being said, what's so interesting, right, is that the Japanese have made a history and basically entire career out of copying Chinese stuff and making it better. And then Koreans made the history out of doing that with the Japanese. But anyway, it's funny because it's like, think about it. Who gets considered to have invented martial arts? It's probably mostly the Japanese, especially at large effectiveness. They didn't. Arguably, the Indians and the Chinese did. They were the first Asians to create martial arts. The problem is that who created the initial Japanese martial arts? The ruling class. The shogun ruling class, I might add. So the very powerful, rich pirate level fucking traders from Okinawa, which is where Okinawa karate came from. It's why the Okinawan people created karate. It's because they stole it from, well, stole is a weird word to use in the context of martial arts. It's more like you borrow things and then you systematize it on your own. They learned kung fu from the Chinese, which they would use, if you're wondering why they ever even had to learn martial arts besides just being cool, most people were learning weapons training, including in Japan. So then why were people learning martial arts? It's because they were fighting on boats. And when you fight on a boat, 90% of the conflict is close quarters. So you're gonna have to fight at some point with your fists, your elbows, your knees, or some part of your body. So that's what essentially the Okinawan pirates, because they were pirates that created karate, by the way, that's what they were doing. They were fighting people. So in close quarters combat. So then whenever Japan took that stuff back, it was only for the rich and powerful. Martial arts was restricted only for those who were basically accepted into schools. Watch Bruce Lee movies. He even talks about this. In fact, watch Return of the Dragon. Like, these are concepts that are played throughout Bruce Lee's movies, where he talks about it from the Chinese perspective. But that essentially that was the issue with Japanese martial arts, is they wouldn't let you in if you were Chinese. They wouldn't let you do it if you weren't Japanese. So it was like this incredibly like xenophobic and only reserved for the most powerful people. That's how Japanese martial arts started. So it's, you know, pretty cool, because then you had people like Jigoro Kano come out in the 1800s who basically said, look, all of these techniques are kind of like varying in terms of their level of effectiveness. Let's just take the most effective techniques of all of these martial arts and teach it to everybody as a base martial art for like the military, for effectiveness, for spiritual meditation and all of that stuff. Let's do it for all of it. Well, that's what Jigoro Kano did when he invented judo. He basically was like, all right, well, let's create a systematized, most effective technique. And that's why judo is so effective, is because it literally was created for the purpose of being the most effective techniques. And so karate, I would argue, is less so in that sense, because if you look at like the creation of karate, it has a lot less shared history with other continents outside of Asia. Whereas grappling, for those that know, is very Western. Like, Greeks were grappling, Turkish people were grappling, you know, you name it. Ancient, you know, Siberian people, people in like North Russia and stuff were wrestling. Like, people were wrestling kind of more commonly than they were striking. So I think that's why judo has a lot more effectiveness in a broad context, is because it was created with that context. in the first place. Yeah, Persians as well were wrestling. Sorry, I say Turkish people, but they weren't Turkish yet. And Turks didn't even exist as a concept yet. Yeah, and that's essentially because all sword fighting manuals have to include grappling. Because, I mean, again, I'm trying to like walk everyone through it for people that don't know and for people that do know. I'm trying not to also seem like arrogant. But it's because if you just think about it, if I swing my sword at my opponent and he parries me slightly to where now I've made contact with my body, are we sword fighting or are we grappling now? We grappling, boys, which is why the Japanese invented jujitsu. Originally dubbed jujutsu. Jujutsu was essentially this concept of, all right, samurais are going to make contact with each other. And then what? So jujutsu was essentially samurai jujitsu. It's fucking, go look it up, guys. It's fucking awesome. Jujutsu is weapons training based. They do like weird, crazy flip moves and shit, but it's like, but when you look at why, it's because it was a martial art that was designed to kill other samurai with swords. And now here's the coolest part about it. It wasn't even for samurai versus samurai combat. It was for militiamen, common man combat. So meaning that common men learned how to fight with jujutsu so they could kill samurai, because samurai were the rich ruling class. True story. So yeah, the histories there are weird, but like the reason why Oriental cultures, to Maghorn's point, is were seen differently than European cultures was largely because of Shintoism, was largely because of the earliest creations of martial arts are all based in meditation and based in tradition. Now, I mentioned judo, and people might be saying, but if judo was invented in the 1800s, why is it so traditional? Actually, judo is a part of the Japanese movement to re-traditionalize their country and make them kind of more in line with the ancient Shintoism that used to make them so fucking scary. Do you guys ever wonder why samurais were so terrifying besides their amazing fucking swords? This is the kind of stuff people don't like to talk about too, by the way, with conflict. It was their mentality, dude. They weren't afraid of death. Literally. Like, go watch The Last Samurai, totally exaggerated version of the actual story and over the top. But really, go watch that movie, because even if it's a cheesy, what's the actor, Tom Cruise movie? Bro, you can see like how they played Yamamoto in that. The actor that played him, I think, is like the most famous Japanese actor, by the way, literally the most famous Japanese actor at the moment. But they weren't afraid to die, bro. They were like welcoming that shit. So it's like, it's so like, you can imagine why the Japanese in the 1800s were like, well, we're trying to be imperialistic. How can we get that back? Well, let's fucking bring martial arts back as like the thing that you practice to show your ability and your connection to the earth. And, you know, so that's why they kind of brought it back. Karate did too, by the way. Look this stuff up, guys. Karate and judo didn't become traditional martial arts until basically the 1800s, when they were created with that whole point in mind, right? Like, karate existed before that, but it was created as the Japanese Okinawan karate originally, but became Japanese karate in the 1800s. Well, I mean, being afraid of death is, I mean, if you think about it, technically speaking, in any conflict in which you could die, anybody who's not mentally ill would have fear. So to explain, fear is a chemical creation, which means that anyone that would be risking dying essentially would have fear. Now, when people talk about Japanese shoguns, for example, or samurai or whatever, people in Japanese war and military being fearless, Maghorn is talking a little bit of why that happens, which is that it comes from propaganda that tells you that it's actually an okay way to live. Now, I'm going to push back and say that, like, I think propaganda is a pretty Western-centric way to look at it, no offense, Maghorn, because this was actually their religion. And it originally was their religion. I mean, there's still Shinto temples in Japan that people still pray to. The problem is that as Christianity became more commonly practiced and other religions started to be more practiced, people weren't treating it the same way anymore. So in the 1800s, when the Japanese had this big revival movement, I would argue that that's probably propaganda, right? Because at that point, they're like, well, we're clearly not this anymore, but let's get back to that. So like, that was kind of like what the Germans did, right? I mean, it's very much propaganda. It's like telling everybody, like, we're going back to this, and we're going to be this, and like, da-da-da. And so I think it was an element of that. That's where the propaganda heavily comes in, is the 1800s, right? When they completely change how, like, or they try to change how people are looking at this stuff. Now, the point that I think you do make, Gamer Today, which is worth mentioning, is the same issue that people would encounter with the Aztecs, is cultures like the, cultures that most people are familiar with are going to come from cultures in which they're familiar with not having to die every day, right? Like the UK hasn't had that struggle in some time. America hadn't had that struggle in some time, like, right? And so when you look at like the Aztec people, who were literally so hated and had such an underdog status that they had to build a city on a lake. That's how much people wouldn't let them live normally, right? So if you look at it from that perspective, you're like, well, like people back then were harsh and accepted death because they were dying all the time. So like Aztecs accepted death because everybody was dying. Like Aztecs accepted that you could die because you probably were gonna die. Like, and so I think for some people outside of these cultures, they can look at that and be like, that's propaganda to trick you into just being obedient. And it's like, how could you have said that before the hierarchies were ever created in the first place? For that, it'd be impossible to make that argument, because religion isn't created for the sole purpose of dominating people's minds. Like, it's like, no matter how much you hate religion, that's never been the purpose of it solely. It's like to just like trick your brain. You also have to bring with it a system of values, right? There has to be like an actual benefit to fulfilling and believing in the system. And in Aztec history, for example, gods were just basically, they had supporters, they had groups and people that followed and prayed to certain gods. So for example, if you were a soldier, you very likely would pray to the god of war, because essentially he was your patron. So if you die, the idea is that you die like by kind of going to this god and they give you this other place to kind of like live or whatever. The idea is that if you were a farmer, then you would have a different god, right? So it's not like you would be like, well, I'm gonna go die in combat because I'm a farmer. It's like, well, you're a fucking farmer, bro. Like, you want to die on your land and like die doing what you're doing, versus like go become the super soldier or whatever the fuck, like, how people feel about Sparta, I would even say, in Ares. Rooting it in religion doesn't make it less propagandistic. Think about how Christianity was leveraged to get people to fight for the Crusades. You're comparing Shintoism to the Crusades? Yeah. No offense, Maghorn, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, literally at all. Like, it's such a different argument that you're making that I don't even know where to start, to be honest. I would first start with learning what Shintoism is and what ancient Japanese religion was. Just like mythology, it's just living on the land. It's just like, hey, the waters and shit come tying. It's like, when people die because of that this is what it means, right? It's like their best guide of how to follow things. So when Shintoism was created, it literally is impossible that it was created for the means that you're implying. It literally would be impossible, because that hadn't even happened yet. Religion hadn't even gotten to that point yet, like literally in the world. So that's why I keep making the distinction that if you're saying in the 1800s that becomes the point in which they start propagandizing the Japanese people to believe in Shintoism so they could then kind of like utilize them for their benefit, I mean, it's kind of hard for me to disagree with that, because a lot of Japanese people died after the 1800s and died in the name of imperialism and died in the name of religion and died in the name of glory and died in the name of a bunch of things that don't mean anything really, that were probably just told to them so they could feel that they were important. But that's different than the Japanese people during the time when Shintoism is actually being practiced, because these people literally have a way of looking at the world in which you're not afraid of death in the same way. And I think it's a hard thing for Western cultures, especially. I see people try to say this about Vikings a lot. Vikings weren't scared to die. It's like, literally anyone that ever wants to live is going to have a fear of dying. But to talk about Vikings in a way that you actually would think that their culture is anywhere analogous to yours, it's a bit ridiculous. Like there's a lot of italicized stories of the Vikings, like very famous ones. But there's also like peer-reviewed stories that are pretty fucking crazy that actually encounter this concept of Vikings essentially being like, you know what, life isn't that important in the big scheme of things, not if I'm trying to accomplish other things, right? So, but also it should be worth acknowledging that a lot of the time religion, belief systems surrounding it, and things of that nature are used in order to make you a better soldier, right? And making you a better soldier arguably is making you more obedient, right? So to that point, I do, trust me, I understand what people are talking about when they're talking about religion creating that. It absolutely does. That being said, we're talking about, you know, completely different religions, completely different people from completely different walks of life. So it's like looking and approaching them from the whatever perspective that we come from, it's oftentimes not even that useful. Like, for example, people talk about how Vikings they didn't feel pain and they were berserkers, and berserkers were just like hyped up on like whatever. And it's like, well, actually, like it's not that great of a benefit if you actually think about it. What they were doing is taking a certain chemical that basically numbed them out. But the problems with that is that then they wouldn't also know whenever they were being attacked or hurt or killed. And there's stories of Vikings literally walking around like basically dying because they're not paying attention to the fact that they have wounds, because they were hopped up on this chemical that wasn't widespread or anything like that. Like, I know as cool as berserkers are, but there's stories like that where you hear and you're just like, okay, well then if Vikings are so cool, then why do they need the chemical in order to help? What's like, you're human. You feel pain. You're scared. You're like, even if you believe in the gods and da-da-da-da, you know, like there's still a healthy level of you that doesn't want to go there, you know? In fact, everyone knows this scene because it's like the most famous Viking scene. When the Vikings first encountered the Christians, they said, hey, you know, would you die for your God? And there's a famous story where one of the Christian guys says, yes, I would die for my God. And so the Viking guy walks right over to him. I think this was in, there's like a bunch of Viking TV shows out, so I don't know which, I mean, there's one literally called Vikings. I'm not sure if it was that one or one of the other ones, but they showed this thing happen in the whole story, where the Jarl goes over to the guy who's a priest and just stabs him to death and kills him, basically. And the whole point is that he says, good, I'll let you go to him. That was it wasn't like, oh wow, your God fucking sucks, he let you die. It was actually, he's like, oh, okay, well, so you're saying if you die, you go to your God and you're not afraid of that? It's like, okay, cool, I'll kill you. Right? Like logically, that makes sense. It's like, you know, you see a lot of that happen in the early goings with Vikings. Then they get Christianized and don't become any nicer, ironically, but yeah. Yeah, and I also think that if it seems like from your perspective, Maghorn, talking about propagandizing troops, I would argue that any troop ever is propagandized, but to the point to where the most famous ones have been propagandized, like the you know, Japanese in World War II, for example, like kamikazes and like that, are like, people love to talk about that. It's like, well, there's also stories of Japanese pilots and soldiers mutinying, and also literally turning on their superiors. So like, it's like, you can tell the story of like, so the Japanese government introduced religion to everybody. Nobody's saying that. Like what happened is religion already existed, and the mechanisms in which people could tweak already existed. So all the Japanese did in the 1800s is add gasoline to that fire. But the point that I was trying to make to you is that that's not the same as saying Shintoism is the thing in which you propagandize people, because Shintoism wasn't created to propagandize people. Like, religions aren't created for that reason. So it doesn't make any logical sense. That's where I was coming from, to think about it from that front, because it's like, well, Shintoism in the 1800s was 500 years old already and out of favor. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, at that point, it's like, if you're bringing in Shintoism as a method of like exposing it to soldiers, at that point it feels like it's literally propaganda. Because it's not like they're sitting there practicing Shintoism anymore. No, they're just being told, well, guys, if you get back to this, we'll have the former glory of Japan. That's literal propaganda. Like, they definitely lied to them about that, right? Like, versus being like, hey, you know, I think only at one point in 2010, only one person was speaking like Welsh. And then within like 5 years, like I think 400 people now speak Welsh. Like, that to me is like where it's like, that's not propaganda. That's like, look, and not saying you said that, but like, that's a great example of looking back at old history, being like, let's reclaim it, and then reclaiming it. You can't really propagandize that. But if you were to do that with like ancient Celtic religion, you kind of could, you know? Like, you could be like, well, in my religion, if I just kill you, I'm the leader. And it's like, okay, well, then that's not that great to have for large groups of population. But if the leader did that and then took fucking charge, that wouldn't be that great. So I do think that I'm taking so much time to respond to you because unfortunately the vast majority of religion and ideology, because religion isn't the only ideology that exists, is used to make you better at doing your job. But if you're a soldier, how are you better at doing your job if you don't want to do it? Well, they have to convince you that either you're fighting for something like here or you're fighting for something up there. And I think that makes perfect sense because we don't want to die and we would rather die knowing that we're dying for something, right? You're trying to say that you could do it with any ideology just by picking out certain parts and twisting them. Yeah, well, you definitely could. I mean, in fact, to your point, if you picked Shintoism, I mean, what else would you pick? Like, if I could give you guys the choice, which one would you pick? I know which one I'm picking, Shintoism, at 10 times out of 10. Or Hinduism, but most likely Shintoism. And it's like, why? It's because these religions were married with conflict and married with martial arts. So it's like, bro, if I'm creating a fucking army, you bet your damn ass I'm teaching them Shintoism. I'm not gonna make them a Buddhist, right? Like, there's incredibly low amounts of historical instances in which Buddhists were creating the conflict, right? So, I think I understand what you're saying now, though, Maghorn. And by the way, if you're wondering why I responded in the way I did, typically it's because I feel like people just don't really understand Asian culture that well. And so they'll speak about it in a way where it's kind of like from the Western lens, like people will say like, oh, Shintoism, Christianity, these aren't comparable. Like, they're not even the same planet comparable. They don't even believe the same things. They don't believe that things come to the same creation. The ideals aren't even accessed in the same way. Like, to your point, you could then use both of them for evil or for like a soldier that just is not afraid of dying. Yeah, I think you could, honestly. I mean, if you look at early Vikings, early Christian Vikings, I think actually show that off the most. They show off this like willingness to die. And I think that was actually because they got exposed to Christianity. They were more like that. So that would mean that I would basically agree with you. Yeah, well, Taoism and Buddhism aren't going to conquer the world. Shintoism, I recommend looking into it sometime because it's essentially like the militant version of Buddhism, in my opinion. Which is, it's not like that scary as I'm not trying to make it sound like it's fucking terrifying. But what's scary is what it could do to your mind, in my opinion. Like, it could really turn you into this like Terminator. And that's why I really feel like that was what they were trying to do in the 1800s and 1900s with Japanese. They were trying to make them more like Shinto than Buddhist, right? Like, a Buddhist is more likely to lay down his weapons and let himself get killed to prove a point. Whereas Shinto is going to kill you in the name of their god and pray for it and celebrate after. Like, in fact, if you kill them, they're celebrating as well. They're like, all right, fuck. At least I'm going to heaven, you know? Like, again, that's an oversimplification, but that's the idea. That's why, and I'm more familiar, by the way, if you're wondering, with Shintoism because I love Asian martial arts. And so you can watch Asian martial arts. Why did it become so heavily propagated during a time when weapons were still in existence? It wasn't just because people were fighting on ships. It's because Shintoism was also kind of like, all right, well, let's see what your art has against my style. And my style is the way of God. So, if my clan beats your clan, then my clan's better in the name of God. You feel me? As you can imagine, that's basically like Cobra Kai. It's like Cobra Kai with like ancient fucking weaponry and like... Anyway, ancient martial arts is just nuts, bro. Like... And really what I was trying to go to with the ancient martial arts and bringing it up in the first place is that martial arts were about weapons. They're about fighting with weapons, right? We discovered the ability to fight unarmed much later, like as an established fighting style, right? So in the 500s is when we know that, roughly speaking, the Chinese or the Indian people started to talk and propagate martial arts. Now, many people believe these early martial arts, like Tai Chi, for example, to be more so about things like Shintoism, more about expressing and meditation of breathing and movement and how you feel when you do things, right? It was more about that. Well, like I said, after Japan got exposed to China, they got exposed to Kung Fu. They brought Kung Fu back to Okinawa, created Okinawan karate, which is super fucking brutal and awesome, by the way. But then Japan does not propagate Okinawan karate. So for people wondering, how do you know this is true? Google Okinawan karate, right? Like, let's just go watch it. Okinawa karate. And watch that it is basically nothing like modern karate. There's a lot more punching. Look, he's punching in a boxing stance. You don't even see that in most karate. But that's because Okinawan karate is about punching. It's about striking. It's about quickly taking your opponent off or out very aggressively because you could be fighting them on a boat, on a ship. Look at the quick movements, snapping kicks. You can't make wide arcing kicks like the Koreans do. You can't do a bunch of spinning crazy shit like the Chinese were doing. You had to do short movements that were mass effectiveness. You can see it in the Okinawan karate. Now compare this to Japanese karate. Let's do kata. Olympics. So this is at the Olympic level. In fact, let me see if I can find the girl that... Okay, there's Rika. If you don't know Rika, I'm surprised that you don't, because she's pretty fucking famous. But this is Rika. Here it comes. Y'all ready? Now, remember the words that I said. That modern Japanese karate is more like Shintoism. It's actually more like ancient karate in a sense. What does that mean? It means it's more traditional. It's more about breathing. It's more about movement. It's more about expression. It's more about your form. That's what kata means in Japanese. It's more about your form, right? So she's mastering her movement, her breathing. She's not wasting any movements. But does this account for an actual effective fighting style? Actually, not very much, unfortunately. In fact, it's why karate largely in this age was not ever really seen or kind of known as like the dominant martial art. In fact, oftentimes karate fighters were getting beaten by Muay Thai fighters, we're getting beaten by boxers, we're getting beaten by judo fighters. And that's another thing that Japan tested. They had martial arts mixed before just about anybody else did. So they kind of knew this stuff already. They knew that like basic karate wasn't really working against judo for some reason. Why wasn't it? It's because this isn't what ancient karate is anymore. Or this isn't ancient karate, it's modern karate. But it's modern karate that was ancientized, if you will. They demodernized karate to make it more broadly appealing to everybody and also make it more palatable to people for the, Shinto mind reasons, but weren't actually teaching you the full effectiveness of your body anymore. So it sounds kind of funny, but Japan managed to maintain that with judo because judo was created for that purpose. So that's why karate has lost a lot of its effectiveness. I grew up doing karate, so I'm familiar with it. But if you go to Okinawa, Or go watch like a Shotokan karate person or like Kyokushin. Like these are forms of Japanese karate that are brutal. There's head kick knockouts, there's punching in the face. It's like, these look like full fights. But if you watch actual standard Japanese karate, it looks like a dance. Like people were dancing. You're not just kata, but actually sparring. It looks like people are dancing. It's because that's not karate anymore. It's essentially a newer version that was created to kind of be more essentially meditative than actual effective in combat. So there was also Shungendo, which is even more like Ruo Shinto. Interesting. I would agree that Muay Thai is probably much more effective. Yeah, and I love kata, just to be clear. I'm not even saying this from a perspective of like, Japanese karate now sucks. I actually still like those aspects. The problem is that now when you lose the effectiveness, which is what Japanese martial arts were built on originally, then you lose the soul of what it means to be a Japanese martial art. So like, that's the issue I have with modern karate, is that it's basically been bastardized, especially when it was brought to America. America has a tendency of kind of like McDojoing everything, turning everything into McDonald's, and unfortunately that's what they did with karate. They ruined karate just as much as the Japanese did. And you can't blame just Americans. I hate when people do that. They try to say like, oh, Americans watered down karate. It's like, guys, who watered it down first? The Japanese. Who were giving those black belts out in Japan? The Japanese. Who were opening up schools to make money when they realized it was making a lot of money in the US, because it doesn't make money in other countries. Martial arts doesn't make money in any country besides the US, the UK, countries that have lots of money, basically. Really, but a martial art isn't a gun, because if you don't have your gun, you're dead, buddy. Like, if I get my hands on you and you don't have a gun, you're 100% dead. That's why martial arts are effective. Because if you can only defend yourself when you can utilize a tool, can you really defend yourself? Or is it just situational defense? What about drunken fist from Drunken Master? Is that actually a thing? So yes, that's a great question. Drunken style of fighting is actually a real concept. It is not the idea of being drunk necessarily. What it is, however, is fighting off rhythm. So for people who haven't played games with a drunken Shaolin master, I believe there's a couple fighting games. Can guys like mention the character names in chat so people can go look them up? I know people don't want to watch actual fighting, so go look up the fucking video game characters who simulate the same shit. But it actually is this concept of fighting where you're fighting off rhythm constantly. And there's actually multiple fighters that fight in this way even now. It's this off rhythm fighting. It's this fighting where it's like, this is normal fighting. I'm in a rhythm and I'm like, okay. And I'm like, boom, and I'm boom, 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 and like, I'm going to do the attacks. And like someone who's drunken would be like, maybe they're just going off the rhythm. They're not really totally on the rhythm. So whenever you try to attack them on rhythm, suddenly you're missing because they're like ignoring the rules, if you will. It's almost like if you're dance partnering with somebody, but they're just doing different moves. You're like, what? I can't even keep up with you. It's like, that's kind of what a drunken Shaolin master, if you will, is doing. Now, a Shaolin master is actually a real thing, and they are incredibly legit. Now, Shaolin masters are incredibly dedicated to both their desire to like center themselves and meditate, but also to keep their body at ultimate effectiveness. So if you go to a Shaolin temple, what they're doing is constantly working out, constantly making food, constantly working on their environment, constantly keeping the temple going. And that's basically all they do. I mean, in fact, if you guys want to go be a Shaolin monk, you can. It's volunteer based. In fact, I know someone that went and was a Shaolin monk for like a couple of years, where you get free food, place to stay. You just have to basically dedicate yourself to being a Shaolin monk. And so I've watched them actually do martial arts before, And their art is a lot more about expression. Again, very common in Chinese martial arts. For people wondering, why do Chinese martial arts seem so fake? It's because they're the oldest people at doing martial arts. So essentially, my kind of like rundown of that is that they got bored. They're just like bored of the same shit. So they're just like, all right, let's do like super fucking karate and super kung fu. And let's make it to where this guy, like, they fight, but then this guy actually has like fucking powers and shit. You see it in Japanese, or in things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Chinese like lore, they just love this like over the top martial arts stuff. Japan actually is not that way, and historically was not that way, which is why I think what they did with karate in the 1800s was so interesting, because Japanese is all about effectiveness. It's about getting there as fast as you can and doing the technique with a little bit of fat as you can, you know, which is not very Chinese. So you've been saying I've been practicing Drunken Fist the wrong way this whole time? Probably, honestly. So you're saying I've been practicing, oh no, I already read that one. It's not hard to pin a gun in a position where it's no longer effective. It isn't, and also it's been shown over and over again that even civilians have managed to disarm trained professionals. It's because actually, like, when it comes down to grappling, holding your gun becomes grappling. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if I'm aiming my gun and I'm trying to shoot somebody, this is combat with a gun. Now, if somebody has actually grabbed onto me and I'm trying to free my gun away from them, or like my pistol or whatever, now we're grappling. So now it suddenly becomes it's more equal, right? Where it's more about like, am I faster than them? Do I know how to like properly pull the gun, and so on and so forth? And it's actually really hard. Grappling with a gun and a weapon, incredibly difficult, by the way. Like, I've done with a fake knife before. It's pretty hard to not get stabbed when you grapple somebody unless you can remove the weapon. Just like it's pretty hard to not get shot if you can't remove the weapon. That being said, much easier to remove a gun than it actually is to remove a knife. So if anything, close quarters fighting with a gun, way easier than with a knife. Now, mind you, someone's gonna think about the memes where they show the guy pointing the gun and then the guy's like turns around and he gets like shot and like he wakes up in heaven. Like, obviously the gun in that scenario won already. The gun already won. But if somebody hasn't even gotten to their gun yet, which, by the way, for people saying that stuff doesn't exist, Maghorn is pretty familiar with World War II stuff. You remember what happened to the Marines in the Pacific when they landed on Iwo Jima? There's a big reason they lost a lot of Marines there. They got CQC'd. The Japanese were CQCing them, and they only had 20,000 troops. Their entire regiment was 20,000. Yet how many did the Japanese take out and deal with? It was like, they were trained in martial arts. I find it weird that nobody ever really talks about that story. But it's like, actually, the Japanese were using their martial arts just fine against the Americans. In fact, whenever it got to CQC, it seemed to help them a lot, didn't it? And so that's where it kind of comes like, well, now we know that just about everybody in the military knows how to fight at a basic level, right? They like, whether it be MMO, a form of grappling in the military, whether it be bayonet fighting, knife fighting, you learn some sort of like grappling and basic exchanges. That being said, I've rolled and trained with many military professionals, and they're not experts in hand-to-hand combat or some shit. Like, they're not experts in CQC unless they are. Like, no, they know how to aim their gun in formation, fire, and do what they're told, basically. But actual martial fighting ability, only certain soldiers actually fully learn that kind of stuff. And they're usually special forces, or Korean soldiers, or Japanese soldiers. Like, certain cultural soldiers make their participants learn martial arts. It's less common in America, but it definitely exists. If anything, the problem in America is just we try to rush everything. So MMO is good grappling. It's not great grappling. And we could teach great grappling, but for some reason we don't. Anyway, I'm the military strategy nerd martial art dork guy, so I end up talking about stuff like this all the time. Can you do the wrist technique? The wrist technique? Like, cut your own wrist? Or sorry. What do you mean? Either that was like a high level joke, or you just don't know what you were really saying. And that's cool. Yep, that is a story. In fact, Maghorn, I have more stories like that. There's a famous MMA fighter in China who is hated. They've tried to assassinate this guy. They've tried fucking extraditing him. He still lives there and has powerful people protecting him. But basically his whole thing is to kill fake martial arts in China. So he challenges like these masters of like different Chinese arts to fights, and he beats their asses. And there's like multiple videos, and it's brutal. Like, I mean, in a good way. Sorry, I like that stuff, guys. But it's brutal in the sense that you see these guys that are totally delusional going in there like, I'm gonna fight this guy, and he's not even a good MMA fighter. He even admits it. He's like, I'm kind of like meh. Like, he's like, my record's all right. But he goes in there and just smashes all these Chinese dudes, and you're just like, okay, what's going on here? But it's because there's this massive conspiracy, massive economy, massive just countrywide spectacle of fake martial arts. It's so fucking weird. It's bizarre why China is so obsessed with fake martial arts, but they just are. If it's all fake, how can you explain Shang-Chi? Yes, ceremonial fighting. And for people wondering what does that mean, Draknar? Ceremonial fighting is essentially fighting for the purpose of initiating in a combat sequence, but also still getting the safety elements of it, while also getting a little bit of like that personal accomplishment, if you will. What's up, Retix? But yeah, if you want to learn more information about karate and ancient martial arts, I would look up, damn, what is this guy called? He's my favorite karate YouTuber. Jesse Einkempf. No, Jesse Einkempf.
Everybody thinks that their karate style is the best in the world. But actually, many of the old karate masters from Okinawa, the birthplace of karate, thought that karate styles were fake news. They didn't actually like them.
It's fake, phony, fake.
Even though they founded them. Here's a couple of quotes to show you what I mean. There is no place in modern karate for different styles.
See when this quote is taken?
To as
1800s.
The Shotokan style, but I strongly object to this classification. Karate does not have any styles. It simply molds an individual to be an object of defense or offense. There is an insistent opinion that karate has different styles. I think such a view is wrong, as there is no evidence at all. So what's the explanation? Why didn't these Okinawan pioneers like the idea of styles? The answer is because of one special man that came to Okinawa in 1927 and changed the art of karate forever. Check it out. Chinese hand. And that's from each other, and sometimes more karate styles existed, where people would actually cross-train and learn from each other, and sometimes maybe even fight each other to test their skills, and through trial and error develop their own unique individual martial art. This is before the word karate even existed. You see, back in those days, it was known as todi, which literally translates to Chinese hand. And that's because a lot of the original fighting arts that influenced karate were actually from China. And this became a problem when karate was supposed to be modernized by the Japanese. And it all culminated in 1927, when a big demonstration was about to be held on the island in honor of a very special guest that was coming down from mainland Japan. In order to make an exceptional presentation for this VIP, a couple of local karate masters were invited to demonstrate their art. One of them was Miyagi Chojun. Today we know him as the founder of Goju-ryu. Another one was Kian Chotoku. Today we know him as one of the main grandmasters of Shorin-ryu. And the third master was Mabuni Kenwa. Today he's known as the founder of Shito-ryu. But remember, this is before these styles even existed. They were just local karate experts who were invited to demonstrate their art. But there was one big problem. You see, the organizing committee soon found out that Chinese hand was not really the best thing to demonstrate In this dark age of nationalism and anti-Chinese, political forces might be a little bit upset. So they did something really clever. They created the very first styles of karate. By removing the Chinese connection, they decided to use the origin, the place in Okinawa where the demonstrator came from. For instance, Kyan Chotoku was from Tomari, so they called his karate Tomari Te. And Miyagi Chojun from Naha, they called his style Naha Te. Mabuni Kenwa from Shuri, they called his style Shuri Te. So when this very important guest from Japan finally arrived and watched the demonstration, there was no connection to China. This now looked like something that was originally from Okinawa, from different distinct places on the island itself. And today it might be hard to see this because these different areas are all within the very same city of Naha, which is the main city on the island of Okinawa. But back in those days, these areas were a little bit more separated until they grew together in modern times. And that's basically how the first versions of karate styles were created, purely to satisfy this special guest that arrived to watch a demonstration on this tiny island south of Japan. But who was this guest and why was he so important? I'm glad you asked. His name was Jigoro Kano. He was the
Sorry, this is just awesome because I was telling you guys that part.
He also had great political ties with the government and the Olympic Committee, and he was hailed as the nation's great educator. He was a big deal, and for him to visit the island of Okinawa was a great honor, and nothing could go wrong. Especially nothing that had any connection to China. But of course, these categories of karate are not today's modern styles. You see, as karate transitioned from Okinawa to mainland Japan, it was time to cut off any ties to Okinawa, just like the ties to China had been cut off previously. Because now, karate was gonna become a Japanese national awesome martial art, not something from a tiny island that nobody had heard of. And who was responsible for this? It was mainly the Dai Nippon Butoku Kai, the Japanese Martial Arts Association, the governing body. They were responsible for organizing and standardizing the martial arts throughout the nation. And karate was now gonna become one of those. So they needed to make it Japanese. What happened next is the creation of modern karate styles as we know them now. They simply asked the Okinawans, what is your style gonna be called? And so Mabuni Kenwa, for instance, thought, maybe I'll call my style Hanko-ryu, which means half-hard style. Oh no, but Miyagi Chojun already chose Goju-ryu for his style. That means soft, hard style. So I'm gonna go with Shito-ryu in honor of my two teachers, Itosu and Higaonna. And every karate expert who came from Okinawa to mainland Japan had to go through this same process of figuring out a name for their style, even though all of them practiced pretty much the same thing. Because remember, karate was originally not divided.
Pretty crazy story,
It was
right?
unified. It was something that
This is
all
probably
of
one
the
of his
local
best,
martial arts
helpful
enthusiasts
stories, I would
practiced
say.
together. Very often in Matsuyama Koen, the local park in Chinatown, where they would come and practice and exchange techniques with each other. That was the original spirit of karate, before the word karate even existed, and way before the artificial concept of styles was created by the Japanese. To prove my point, check out this video of one kata being performed in 3 different styles at the same time. Can you see the similarities?
Definitely. Obviously, as he knows.
Karate styles, because they were basically a political marketing tool to spread the art of karate to people who had never seen or heard about it before and make it more digestible for the Japanese people. But beneath the surface, we all have more in common than most people realize. And that's why you should never let your style limit your karate.
There you go. Don't let your style limit your karate, guys. I'm just kidding. All right, well, there goes the final little bit of lesson, but I had to show you guys that video because he's awesome. Go check out his videos. But also the whole story of modern martial arts, it's actually a mystery. It's like like, not that it's not known, but like for most people it is like this mystery. Like people don't really just suddenly people think, oh, people were always punching and kicking, you know? But it's like it's actually a pretty recent affair. So it's interesting to learn more about that. But anyway, I'm actually going to leave now. I'll see you guys later. Hope you have a good rest of your weekend. I'm going to try to. And yeah. Stay questioning. Stay curious. And I hope you enjoy the next death of a game, Ragnarok Online. On that note, I'm going to go, what am I going to do? Probably make some food. That's what I'll do. All right, see y'all later.